It was around 1 a.m. when I realized I'd forgotten to take out the trash. I'd eaten mussels that night, and the smell was already starting to linger, so there was no way it could wait until morning. I live in an apartment complex with 4 separate buildings, each with its own badge access door, but all sharing a basement level. The basement is also connected to a nearby market where customers park their cars. To get down there, you badge into one of the 4 elevators, each leading to a different building. The catch is you can't use your badge to get back up. The basement door opens from the inside without a badge, or you could take the elevator to the market and exit that way. To return to your apartment without passing through the market, you need to use one of the 4 coded doors, one for each building. That opens with a numeric code instead of a badge. As I stepped into the hallway, the first odd thing hit me. All the lights were out. It made me uneasy, but not panicked. It was summer, a time when maintenance work often happens, and most residents were likely away on vacation. I brushed it off and headed to the elevator, badge in hand, and made my way to the basement. The second strange thing happened as I pushed open the basement door. Normally, the lights down there are off at this hour, triggered only by motion sensors when someone enters. But this time, they were already on, glowing brightly. I figured it might be tied to the hallway's electrical issue and didn't dwell on it. I'm a bit lazy, so when I reached the bin room, I kept one hand on the door while tossing the trash bag with the other. Just as I let the door go, I heard a sound that stopped me cold. It's hard to describe now, my memory fuzzy and my vocabulary failing me, but it was chilling. It was like the sound of someone in excruciating pain, trying to scream but their voice breaking, like it had been wrung out of them. It reminded me of a dying animal's final cry, desperate and pleading, as if being torn apart by a predator. I couldn't tell if it was human or animal, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized the sound had been there from the moment I stepped into the basement. I'd ignored it at first, chalking it up to the usual hum of machinery, water heaters, central heating, and who knows what else they keep in those locked rooms down there. They often make odd noises, but this was different. It was alive. There was a human-like quality to it, mixed with a scream of pure despair. Then the bin room door slammed shut behind me, loud and sudden, and with it, the sound, or whatever was making it, stopped. My heart was pounding twice as fast as normal. Trying to calm myself, I reasoned it could be someone stumbling home drunk, or maybe someone injured being taken to a hospital. In either case, I told myself I should check if they needed help. But my brain wasn't working right. Fear had taken over, or maybe it was curiosity, or some mix of both. It was a stupid decision, the worst one I made that night, but I started walking toward where I thought the sound came from. Then I heard it, a heavy thud, like a door or a trunk slamming shut. The scream stopped instantly, replaced by footsteps. Fast, deliberate footsteps, coming straight for me. My mind went blank, survival instincts kicking in. I bolted for the only exit I knew, the coded door back to my building. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely punch in the code. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I mistyped, the panel flashing red. I tried again, fingers trembling even more, the sound of those steps echoing in a cavernous basement. Finally, the panel turned green. I shoved the door open with all my strength and threw my body against it to slam it shut. But something was pushing back. Whatever was chasing me was trying to force the door open. I braced myself, planting both feet against the stairs for leverage, pushing with everything I had. It felt like an eternity, but after a few agonizing seconds, the door clicked shut. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted up the stairs. I live on the 6th floor, but I was flying, taking steps 2 or 3 at a time. When I reached the 3rd or 4th floor, I heard the door below burst open again. Seconds later, footsteps pounded up the stairs behind me. The hallway was pitch black. No lights, no visibility. I couldn't see my pursuer, and they couldn't see me, but the sound of those steps felt closer than they probably were. By the time I reached my apartment, my whole body was shaking. Fumbling in the dark, it took forever to find the lock with my key. Whoever was chasing me seemed to struggle with the stairs more than I did, their footsteps still distant enough to give me a sliver of time. I finally got the door open, stumbled inside, and locked it behind me. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to my knees, unable to control my muscles. It took me about 15 minutes to stop shaking, for my brain to start functioning again. I haven't told anyone about this. I don't even know what made that sound, who or what was chasing me, or why. But one thing I'm sure of, whatever it was, it didn't have good intentions. When I was 18, I moved to my father's house after a rough breakup with an abusive ex. It was a tough time for me, mentally and emotionally. I was a wreck. The house itself was nice, a newly built detached home, maybe 5 to 10 years old, with a small garden out front. Nothing about it screamed haunted or unusual, but it was always cold, even with the heating cranked up. My mom, after some snooping, called the place unloved, like it lacked warmth or life. I don't know if that's relevant or if she was just being dramatic, but that's what she said. I was in therapy once a week and unemployed, struggling with my mental health. Most days, I just slept or zoned out, lost in a fog of dreams and exhaustion. Eventually, I mustered the strength to pull myself together and try to make something of my life. That's when the weird stuff started happening. Up until one particular evening, I never felt creeped out or uncomfortable in the house. My brother and I were chilling, watching TV, when we heard a strange sequence of sounds, a whoosh, followed by a click and a thud. We turned to each other slowly, both thinking, "What the heck was that?" Cautiously, we peeked around the corner and saw the front door wide open. I bolted over and slammed it shut, my heart racing. I was paranoid about my ex showing up after he'd threatened to stalk me post-breakup. I was obsessive about locking that door, securing every possible bolt and latch. My dad wasn't home, he was out of town, so it couldn't have been him. No one else had a key. I went to bed that night trying to convince myself it never happened. The next incident was worse. I started feeling terrified of sleeping in the dark, like a switch had flipped in my head. One night, I was in an anxiety spiral, shaking in my room, consumed by this irrational fear. Suddenly, the TV downstairs blared to life. I was alone in the house. No one else could have turned it on. Our TV setup was complicated, requiring a 3-step process to shut it down and close the cabinet doors. I ran downstairs, heart pounding, and sure enough, the cabinet was open, and the TV was on, glowing in the dark. I tried to stay rational, blaming it on an electrical surge, but deep down, I knew that didn't add up. I turned it off and hurried back to bed, shaken. Then there was the scream. I was in my room again, already scared because it was dark and I was alone. Out of nowhere, a blood-curdling scream ripped through the house. I jolted out of bed, my body spasming with fear, and flipped on every light I could find. Nothing. No one was there. I checked outside, nobody. I slept with the light on that night, too rattled to close my eyes in the dark. Smaller things happened too. My keys would move around. I'd leave them in one spot, and they'd end up somewhere else entirely. At first, I thought it was playful, harmless even. But waking up to find a random light on in the house, when I knew I'd turned everything off, was unnerving. These incidents weren't consistent. They'd happen once every few months, unpredictable and sporadic. The worst came 2 years ago. I started experiencing sleep paralysis after moving into that house, sometimes 2 to 4 times a month. One night, it was different, terrifying in a way I'll never forget. I was lying on my stomach, head turned to the side, when my eyes snapped open. I knew something awful was coming. I couldn't move, and panic set in. I tried wiggling my toes, mentally screaming at myself to stay awake, to keep my eyes open. Then I heard it, running on the landing, followed by childish giggles. My heart sank. Something jumped onto my back. I felt the pressure, heavy and real, pinning me down. Then something pressed my head into the pillow, so hard I couldn't breathe. I knew some people say to close your eyes during sleep paralysis and let it pass, but every time I tried, I'd feel this horrible sensation, like being roughly tickled all over my body, so intense it brought tears to my eyes. I fought to stay awake, but eventually, I gave in and closed my eyes. The tickling sensation hit, overwhelming and painful. I thought I got up, felt myself moving, but then, bam, I was back in bed, in the same position. It happened again and again. I'd scream, feeling the burn in my lungs, but each time it was like I was sucked back into my paralyzed body. The whole ordeal felt like it lasted years. Finally, I threw myself awake, stumbling downstairs. I chain-smoked outside, feeling violated, like something had invaded my space. When I showered later, I noticed red marks down my ribs from that tickling sensation. A few days later, bruises appeared on my legs, and that scared me even more. Things settled down after I got into a new relationship 2 years ago. My partner stayed over when my dad was away, and for the first time in ages, I felt safe. I didn't experience anything after that sleep paralysis episode, thankfully. I'm at university now, but I visited my dad's house over Christmas. It still felt cold, heavy, soulless the moment you walked in. There's a lodger staying in my old room now, so I don't know if they've experienced anything strange. If anyone has any idea what any of this could have been, I'd love to know, because it still freaks me out thinking about it. This happened to me just this week. I'm a guy in my mid-30s, and English isn't my first language, so bear with me. I was sitting in my car on the side of a highway around midnight, somewhere between two major cities in Europe. Less than an hour earlier, I had a nasty fight with my girlfriend. Things got heated, she turned passive-aggressive, and I lost it, yelling at her. I couldn't stand being around her that night, so I grabbed my keys, slammed the door, and stormed out to drive to my apartment in another city, my hometown. I was feeling sick to my stomach, tears streaming down my face, soaking into my beard. The emotions from the fight were overwhelming, replaying in my head over and over. I pulled over to the side of the highway to take a break, my car's blinking hazard lights clicking rhythmically into silence, interrupted only by the occasional roar of a passing truck. My body felt tense, my mind stuck in a loop of the argument. I hated being trapped in that cycle, so once the tears slowed, I decided to keep driving. I turned the key in the ignition, but it wouldn't budge. Surprised, I tried again, but the key was stuck, refusing to turn all the way to start the engine. I tried several times, growing more frustrated with each attempt. The thought of being stranded on the highway all night crept into my mind, especially since I'd foolishly left my cell phone behind in the heat of the argument. I had no way to call emergency services or roadside assistance. The constant clicking of the hazard lights felt like a sledgehammer pounding in my head, so I switched them off. That's when I realized just how dark it was around me. A few trucks passed by in the next few minutes, but I didn't feel safe stepping out to flag one down. I don't know why, but I just didn't trust them. I've always hated how some people freeze in situations that demand action, so I forced myself to get out of the car. It was lightly raining, and I knew where I was since I drove this highway often. About 2 kilometers ahead was an exit with a gas station, which I hoped would still be open after midnight. I locked my car and started walking along the side of the highway, staying on the other side of the guardrail for safety. The road was to my left, and on my right were trees faintly lit by moonlight. I'll admit, I was scared, really scared. My mind started playing tricks, imagining shadowy figures hiding in the trees, watching me with intense eyes, ready to grab me. After about 15 minutes, I began climbing a small hill, and the rain turned to snow. The ground and trees were already dusted with a light layer of powder. A while later, I spotted the highway exit in the distance, closer than I'd expected. I must have misjudged the distance, but I was relieved to be nearing lights, people, and a phone I could use. Just before the exit, there was a bridge crossing over the highway. As I approached it, I saw someone jogging on top of the bridge. I stopped startled and looked up. It was a woman, her silhouette clear, a ponytail, small and athletic build, crossing the bridge. I couldn't believe it. Who would be jogging at midnight on a remote road near a highway, with woods on both sides? For Americans, this might seem especially odd, as jogging alone in such isolated areas late at night isn't common and can feel risky. A few seconds later, she was gone. I strained to see her in the darkness, hustle and bustle, but she'd vanished. Still weirded out, I kept walking and passed under the bridge. A couple of meters down the exit road, I had to climb over the guardrail because thick bushes blocked the path. On the right side, behind the bushes, was a trail leading back to the bridge. I walked carefully down the slippery exit road, wary of passing cars. Then it happened. Someone jumped me from behind, slamming me face first onto the ground in the middle of the road. I screamed in terror and rolled over, ignoring the pain in my chin and right ear. The attacker was already on their feet. To my shock, it was the woman I'd seen jogging on the bridge, mid-20s, wearing running gear. Her eyes were wild, saliva dripping from her mouth. She charged at me again, and I felt a sharp pain in my left eye as she scratched and gouged at it, her fingers digging deep. I stumbled backward, and she came at me again. In a surge of adrenaline, I grabbed her and threw her against the guardrail, her back hitting it with a sickening thud. I collapsed in the middle of the road, clutching my throbbing eye. Moments passed, and she didn't attack again. Through tears streaming from both eyes, I saw her sprinting up the trail toward the bridge. Adrenaline numbed the pain as I scrambled to my feet, slipping and falling on my backside several times as I ran in a blind panic down the exit road. I reached the gas station and burst through the door, startling the clerk behind the counter. My face was bleeding, and my left eye was swollen shut. The clerk called the police and an ambulance. Officers searched the area, but found no one. Now, I'm back in my apartment, alone, still terrified. I can't understand why that woman attacked me, but I'm convinced she was out there in the middle of the night looking for a victim. My dad worked at a beachside bar and grill when I was little. In addition to being a chef, he ran and DJ'd the bike and car shows for the restaurant. The car shows were usually on Wednesdays, and the bike nights, where motorcyclists gathered, were on Fridays. This detail matters because the car shows were on school nights, so I rarely got to go, but my dad often brought me to the bike nights. For Americans, these bike nights are like community events where bikers show off their motorcycles, socialize, and enjoy food and music. Think of it as a casual, rowdy gathering with a lot of leather and Harleys. By all accounts, I was an adorable, mellow kid, and the bikers absolutely loved me. You might think a bar full of rough-and-tumble motorcyclists was no place for a little girl, but I learned a lot about loyalty and friendship from being around them. Some of the bikers would even call the restaurant just to ask if I'd be there that week. They'd bring me stuffed animals, candy, and other small gifts. My favorite biker was a man I called Uncle Teddy, a close friend of my parents. He was a giant, about 6'8" and easily 400 pounds, an ex-Marine who loved his Harley and his cigars. Every week for 5 years, without fail, he brought me a Butterfinger candy bar and a Beanie Baby. I was around 6 years old in 2003 when this happened. It was a Friday night, and my dad had brought me to the bike night as usual. I couldn't keep my eyes open past 8 p.m., though, and the show ran until 10 p.m. So my dad got into the habit of setting up an air mattress for me in the back of the restaurant, in a quiet storage room away from the noise. He and Uncle Teddy would take turns checking on me every 15 minutes. That night, I was fast asleep when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I opened my eyes to see a man I'd noticed around the restaurant before. He wasn't dressed like the bikers. No leather jacket or gear. Instead, he wore a short-sleeved plaid shirt and jeans, looking greasy but not particularly scary. He smiled and said his name was Sean, claiming he was a friend of my dad's. He told me my dad had asked him to drive me home because something had come up. My parents had drilled stranger danger into me 1,000 times, warning me never to talk to anyone I didn't know. But Sean knew my name, my dad's name, and even the nickname everyone called me. That made me trust him. I was only 6, and his calm demeanor seemed convincing. I got up, grabbed the flamingo Beanie Baby Uncle Teddy had given me that night, and followed him toward the parking lot. Sean didn't have a motorcycle like the other guys. He had an old, beat-up 4-door sedan. He opened the back door for me, and I climbed in. The back seat was strange, covered entirely in plastic, like the kind you'd find on furniture in a senior citizen's home. Looking back, I think it was probably there to avoid leaving any DNA evidence. Sean started driving, pulling out from behind the restaurant where his car was parked, out of sight from the bike show. By sheer luck, as we began to move, Uncle Teddy happened to step outside, probably to check on me. He glanced up just as the car passed, and I smiled at him through the window, thinking everything was fine. But Uncle Teddy didn't hesitate. He didn't even stop to tell my dad what was happening. He jumped on his Harley and tore after us before we'd even fully cleared the avenue leading out of the parking lot. The avenue to the restaurant was long, about half a mile, and you had to drive down another street to reach the highway. We were close to that turn when Sean noticed Teddy's motorcycle gaining on us in his rearview mirror. He sped up, but it was no use. Teddy was right on his tail, and Sean must have realized he'd been seen. His license plate was visible, and Teddy had a clear view of him. Suddenly, Sean stopped the car, turned to me, and in a calm but firm voice, told me to get out. Scared now, I didn't waste a second. I scrambled out of the car and ran toward Teddy, who pulled up behind us. Sean peeled out, tires screeching, and disappeared down the road. Teddy scooped me up, holding me tightly for a moment before putting me on the back of his bike and speeding back to the restaurant. By the time we got there, the place was chaos, cop cars everywhere, lights flashing, and most of the bike show crowd gone. My dad was on the sidewalk outside, sobbing and screaming, his face a mix of panic and relief. I'll never forget that moment. I ran to him, hugging him as tightly as my little arms could manage. The rest is a blur. I talked to the police, then went down to the station to describe Sean to a sketch artist. I didn't get home until around 2 a.m. Teddy stayed by my side the entire time. An all-points bulletin was issued for the stolen car Sean was driving, and his sketch was circulated on local news stations, but nothing concrete came up. At one point, they had me look at a lineup, but none of the men were him. 8 years later, when I was 14, my dad decided I was old enough to hear the full story. Sean had been spotted lurking around the bike show a few times before that night. He was a regular customer at the restaurant and had been watching me for over a month, learning my schedule and how often Teddy and my dad checked on me. When his plan failed and Teddy brought me back, I'd assumed the bike show had cleared out because of the police investigation. I was wrong. The bikers had all left to hunt for Sean. Teddy had told them the car's make, model, and description of Sean, and one of the guys recognized him as someone who hung out at a biker bar downtown. My dad paused for a long time when I asked what happened next. All he said was, "They found him." Back in 2005, when I was 18, I had just dropped out of high school halfway through the year. I didn't have enough credits to graduate, and after some health problems in my junior year, I was frustrated with life. Honestly, I was more focused on drinking than school, so I bought a plane ticket and moved to live with my cousin and his girlfriend in a town about an hour north of Seattle, Washington. I also had friends a year older than me living in Seattle, and I'd occasionally drive down to the city to hang out with them, go to concerts, or just crash for a few days. After one of those trips to Seattle, I decided to head back to my cousin's place. I was broke. No money to my name. As I hit the road, I noticed my gas tank was nearly empty. I figured I could make it, but about 20 miles short of my exit, the car started sputtering and gasping for fuel. Just my luck. Thankfully, I was coming up on a rest stop, so I pulled in and coasted to a stop. For Americans, rest stops are common along highways, especially in rural areas like this part of Washington, offering bathrooms, payphones, and a place to rest. I went to the payphone and started calling the few contacts I had in the state, using collect calls since I had no cash. I got hold of my cousin, but he was 3 hours away in his hometown and drunk, no less. No help there. His girlfriend didn't answer. None of my Seattle friends had cars or could drive one, so I was stuck. My cousin said he'd come get me in the morning on his way back, which meant I was spending the night at the rest stop. I settled into my car, reclining the seat and using a hoodie as a blanket. About 20 minutes later, a van pulled into the rest stop, a Chevy Astro van, the kind you'd see used for deliveries or by sketchy contractors. A guy got out, and he looked like a stereotypical creep, about 5'5", pudgy, balding, wearing glasses. He started walking around the parking lot, peering into the few other cars parked there, about 3 besides mine. When he got to my car, he stood in front of it and stared me down for what felt like forever, probably 45 minutes to an hour. My heart was racing. I was convinced I was about to end up as a cautionary tale in a true crime documentary. Eventually, he went back to his van and parked it on the other side of the lot, facing the wooded area behind the rest stop while I was facing the bathroom area. I was no longer relaxed. I sat up, wide awake, keeping my eyes glued to him. I could see him in my side mirror staring at my car from his own side mirror. This went on for about 2 hours. Every so often, he'd get out, walk into the woods, and just stand there in the darkness. I could tell he was still watching me because I saw the cherry of his cigarette light up as he inhaled. My nerves were shot, and I had to pee badly, but there was no way I was leaving my car with this guy around. Finally, I decided to call the state patrol to get him out of there. I walked to the payphone, keeping him in my peripheral vision, and reported the situation. They said they'd send a trooper. I hung up and paced near the phone, still watching him. About 30 seconds later, the payphone rang. Thinking it might be the state patrol calling back, I answered. A voice hissed, "Come on, kid, what's your deal?" I froze, saying nothing. He kept going, "What's the matter?" "Scared? I don't want to hurt you." My blood ran cold. This creep had the payphone number and was calling me from the woods. The phone rang again. I hesitated, worried I'd missed the state patrol, but I picked it up. "Come on, kid," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I don't want to hurt you. I could even give you some money." That was it. He'd threatened me and was trying to lure me out. Rage took over. I slammed the receiver down and started toward my car, remembering I had an axe handle in the back for emergencies like this. As I moved, I saw him step out of the woods, walking toward me. I grabbed the axe handle, pointed it at him, and yelled, "Get back in your van and get the hell out of here, or I'll bash your skull in." He stopped dead in his tracks, staring at me, sizing me up. After a tense moment, he turned, got into his van, and drove off slowly, still watching me. I was shaking from the adrenaline. When the trooper finally arrived, I told him everything. He offered to drive me to a nearby Denny's to wait safely for my cousin. First, he asked if we could check the rest stop across the highway to see if the guy had moved there. I agreed. Sure enough, there was the van. The trooper approached it and gave the guy a serious dressing down, pointing in his face and raising his voice. After about 5 minutes, he came back and explained the situation. Apparently, the guy had no driver's license and claimed a friend had dropped him off, saying he was waiting for them to return. The trooper couldn't charge him with anything based on my story, which seemed odd since he'd threatened me and was clearly up to no good. The trooper warned him that if he was still there on his next pass, he'd be arrested for trespassing, and if he was caught driving, he'd be arrested on the spot. He also mentioned the guy had several pairs of binoculars and a large bag of candy in his front seat, which made my skin crawl. The trooper dropped me at Denny's, and my cousin picked me up the next morning. I told him the story, and we laughed about it in hindsight, relieved it was over. We went back to the rest stop with a can of gas to retrieve my car. But the story doesn't end there. Under my windshield wiper was a note from the creep, written as a poem. I can't recall it exactly, but it started something like, "You should have kept your mouth shut, you stupid little snitch. Somebody should have taught you never to go and snitch. Go back to your mama's side." It went on for several pages, venomous and unhinged. Worse, he'd cut all my brake lines and tampered with everything he could under the car. The car wasn't even mine. A friend had left it with me after deciding not to buy it, planning to pick it up later. We called the troopers again. They took the note and more information, but as far as I know, nothing came of it. They knew who the guy was, which made it frustrating that he wasn't arrested. I didn't stay in Washington much longer after that. For a while, my cousin and I would stop at every rest stop we passed, hoping to find this guy. Looking back, it's probably good we never did, because we were dead set on making him pay. I'm from Pratt, Florida, and this story takes place in the early 2000s. I was going to college in South Florida, but lived with my family in my hometown in the Florida Panhandle, about a 7-hour drive through Central Florida. I usually only went home for the holidays because of the distance. It was Thanksgiving of my junior year, and I was thrilled to have rearranged my midterms to leave campus 3 days early, hoping to beat the holiday traffic and make the trip home quick and easy. My roommates wanted to have one last meal together before we all left for break, so we ate in the campus dining hall around 4 p.m. I hit the road around 5:30 p.m. By 10 p.m., I was about 2/3 of the way home and past the spot where I always stopped at a little mom-and-pop diner by the highway to grab a snack, use the restroom, and call my dad to let him know I was okay. I didn't have a cell phone yet. This was the early 2000s when not everyone had one, especially broke college students. For Americans, these small roadside diners are a classic, often family-run spots serving comfort food like burgers and pancakes, popular with travelers. But when I got there, I was disappointed to find the diner had gone out of business since the summer. No chance for my usual chocolate chip pancakes. There wasn't much else around, just empty stretches of highway, so when I saw signs for a rest stop in a tiny town called Alachua, I decided to pull in. For context, Alachua is a small rural town in North Florida, and rest stops like this are basic facilities with bathrooms, payphones, and sometimes vending machines meant for quick stops on long drives. I parked right under a streetlight for safety and used the restroom. I also called my dad from a payphone to check in. While there, I met an exhausted-looking woman who approached me asking for directions. She said she was traveling with her husband and 2 small children for Virginia and had taken a wrong turn trying to get to Disneyland. I gave her some basic directions and headed back to my car. As I walked out of the rest stop, I noticed a beat-up, unmarked gray or bluish work van parked uncomfortably close to the driver's side of my 1995 Honda Civic. It had Florida plates, which immediately struck me as odd since the woman had said she was from Virginia. The van's proximity and lack of markings set off alarm bells. I turned around and headed back to the rest stop, where I ran into a middle-aged man with 2 little boys. After talking to him, I learned he was the woman's husband. She emerged from the bathroom a moment later, confirming it. Feeling more at ease, I told him about the suspicious van and how I wasn't sure what to do. He offered to check it out, leaving his kids with his wife. He walked confidently up to the driver's side of the van and stood there for a moment. Then, in a voice that quivered slightly but carried clearly from about 100 feet away where we stood, he shouted, "Excuse me, gentlemen. We've already called the police, so I'm going to have to politely suggest you get out of here." He sprinted back to us, grabbed his wife and kids, pointed at me, and said urgently, "Come on, let's all get in the car now." We ran together to his SUV, my heart pounding. I ended up in the back seat with his kids, confused and scared, while he used the payphone, presumably to call the police. Meanwhile, the van peeled out of the rest stop at breakneck speed, jumping the curb and burning rubber as it sped away. It was almost comical how fast they fled. When the police arrived, the man explained what he'd seen. Because I'd parked under the streetlight, he could see inside the van clearly. All the seats except the driver's had been removed. There was a guy in the driver's seat and another in the back, sitting on what looked like a tarp spread out on the floor. Scattered around were random items he couldn't quite identify. Ropes, tools, maybe duct tape. Neither man was doing anything like reading a newspaper or looking at a map. They were just sitting there, waiting. The scene made my stomach turn. The police took our statements and searched the area, but the van was long gone. I was shaken, realizing how close I'd come to something dangerous. The family stayed with me until I felt safe enough to continue my drive home, and I made it without further incident. Thinking back, the thought of those men just sitting in that van, waiting in the dark, still makes me sick. When I was about 13, a noisy family moved out of a house down the block from us in the Prescott Country Club, a quiet, upscale neighborhood in Prescott, Arizona. For Americans, this kind of place is a planned community, often with golf courses and nice homes, where people expect well-kept properties and a sense of order. A strange guy moved into the house they left behind, and the property's condition went downhill fast. On the day he arrived, he pulled up in a large U-Haul type truck, which was normal enough for moving. But the truck never left. It stayed parked in the driveway, an eyesore that stood out in the tidy community. There was an extension cord running from the house to the truck, which I thought was odd. Over time, paint cans, random junk, and debris piled up in the yard and along the side of the house, turning the place into a mess. This wasn't welcome in our small, close-knit neighborhood, where appearances mattered. Anyone who spoke to the guy came away saying he was weird and that you had to tread carefully around him. I mowed lawns to earn some cash, and I've been hired to take care of our friend's yard while they were on an extended vacation. Their house was right next to this guy's place. Every day, as I sweated through the mowing, I could see him spying on me through the blinds in his living room. He wasn't subtle about it either. His eyes followed me day after day, and it made my skin crawl. I'd glance back, giving him pointed looks, hoping he'd knock it off, but he never did. 2 years later, my family was eating dinner and watching the 5 p.m. news when a story broke that made us all freeze. They were reporting on a developing case. A woman's frozen body had been found inside a freezer in a Ryder truck. The camera panned to a house, and my heart sank. It was the weird guy's place. We all stopped chewing, the room dead silent. I ran outside to look down the street, and sure enough, news vans from every station in the state were parked there, satellite dishes extended, with police tape cordoning off the property. Cop cars were everywhere, their lights flashing in the dusk. The story unraveled quickly. This guy had abducted a 23-year-old woman on a Los Angeles freeway, sexually assaulted her, murdered her, and stored her body in a freezer. He'd then driven the truck to Arizona, where he moved into the house next door to his mother, who apparently had no idea what he'd done. The thought of it made my stomach churn, knowing I'd been mowing the lawn right next to that truck, with him watching me the whole time. About 7 years ago, when I was 25, I had an experience that still sends shivers down my spine. I'm female, and at the time, I was working as an admin assistant in an office job to make ends meet. It wasn't my dream career, far from it. I'd been at that job for about a year, and I was already itching to move on to something better, something that actually meant something to me. This creepy incident was the final push I needed to get serious about finding my true career path and getting the hell out of that place. To set the scene, let me describe my workplace. It was an old, somewhat run-down building with multiple floors, each containing various office spaces rented out by different companies. The building was open plan in parts, but was in desperate need of refurbishment, both for health and safety reasons and just to make it look less like a relic from decades past. My office was small, with only 4 or 5 of us working there on any given day. It was located on the ground floor, near the front of the building, with access points at both the front and back. The back entrance, though, was rarely used, mostly just for staff. We called the area near the back the staff quarters, where the lunchroom was located. The lunchroom was tucked away at the far end of a long hallway, completely isolated from the main office area. The building's age meant there was a lot of empty space between the offices and the staff quarters. Because our office was so small, we rotated lunch breaks so only one person was in the lunchroom at a time. Most of my coworkers preferred to grab lunch from nearby shops, but my break was shorter, so I always ended up eating alone in that quiet, secluded lunchroom near the back entrance. At the time, parts of the building were under renovation, which caused some disruption, but our floor was still untouched, operating as usual for the time being. The ground floor only had 2 companies, ours and another one on the opposite side of the building. They used the front entrance exclusively, and we rarely crossed paths with their staff or clients. There was no need to keep track of who was coming or going from their side. The building had a code entry system at the front door, where visitors could buzz the office they needed, and someone would let them in. Workers like me had a code to get through the front door, but the back entrance was barely used, only accessible with a set of keys that a few staff members had. It was completely unmonitored. One day, I was sitting in the lunchroom eating my sandwich as usual. It was freezing in there, as the building's heating was patchy at best. I was minding my own business when I noticed a shadow flash past the door, catching the light underneath. It wasn't unusual. Clients often wandered the halls, especially on the ground floor, looking for the right office. Sometimes they'd get lost, and we'd point them in the right direction. The door had a code system, so random people couldn't just walk in without being buzzed in, which made me feel secure enough. That day, though, the lunchroom door opened, and a man poked his head in. He was sharply dressed, suit, tie, the works, and smelled like expensive cologne. I was caught off guard, mostly because I was a mess with mayo splattered on my shirt and a mouthful of bread. I'm a messy eater, I'll admit it, and I wasn't expecting company, especially not someone who looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. "Can I help you?" I asked, scrambling to clean myself up. He chuckled and said, "Looks like you're the one who needs help." I laughed, embarrassed but not alarmed. He was still standing at the door, not imposing or pushy, just smiling. When I laughed along, he took it as an invitation to come in. To my surprise, he sat down across from me at the table, pulled a sandwich out of a fancy leather bag, and started eating. "I'm the HR manager for the company upstairs," he said casually. Every time I go out to get lunch, I wonder who's sitting in here all alone. So I thought I'd check it out. He seemed so normal, so relaxed, that I didn't think much of it. In fact, it was nice to have some company for once. Usually, I just scrolled through boring news articles on my phone during lunch. We started chatting, small talk mostly. I asked about his job and the company upstairs. He asked about mine. I mentioned where I usually ate lunch, and he talked about his routine. It was mundane but comfortable, more than just passing the time. The guy was charming, and I felt completely at ease. This became a regular thing. He joined me in the lunchroom most days, and I'll admit, I started to develop a bit of a crush. He said his name was Alan, and he was attractive, well-dressed, with a good job, or so he claimed. He was polite, funny, and made me feel special in a way I hadn't in a while. I was single, not bad-looking, and honestly, I enjoyed the attention. It felt harmless, just a little workplace flirtation to brighten my day. I didn't plan to take it anywhere, but I looked forward to our lunches. Alan would complain about the building renovations, saying the upstairs offices were a mess and their break room had been gutted. He said he liked coming down to our lunchroom because it was quiet and nobody from his office knew about it. Nothing about him raised red flags. He didn't seem like a creep, just a normal guy who happened to enjoy my company. That is, until one Thursday when everything changed. Alan stormed into the lunchroom, and I swear, the look in his eyes was like a caged animal, wild, restless, unhinged. I'd never seen him like this, and it instantly put me on edge. He slammed his bag down on the table and started ranting, pacing back and forth, running his hands through his hair. Beads of sweat glistened on his forehead, and his voice was sharp with rage. He was cursing out his boss, saying he was a jerk and that he wanted to gut him like a fish. His eyes, which I'd always thought were a pretty blue, looked darker, almost menacing. I tried to calm him down, saying things like, "It'll be okay," and "Let's just eat, I'm sure it can be sorted out." But he wasn't listening. He slumped into a chair, still seething, and I walked over to him, standing beside him, trying to be supportive. I put a hand on his shoulder, hoping to comfort him. Big mistake. In a flash, he shot up, grabbed me, and pushed me back against the wall. I was stunned, speechless. His body was pressed against mine, his hands pinning my wrists to my sides. It was like he was in a trance, feeding off the control he had over me. He didn't say anything at first, just held me there, his face buried in my neck. I was frozen, my mind racing. This wasn't the charming guy I'd been eating lunch with. I'd always thought I'd be the type to fight back in a dangerous situation, but I was paralyzed, unsure of what he might do. He was volatile, unpredictable, and I didn't want to risk making him angrier. Then, out of nowhere, he licked my neck and whispered, "You smell nice." It was creepy, predatory, and it snapped me out of my shock. I realized I had to get out of there. I didn't know this guy, not really. We'd only been eating lunch together for a couple of weeks, maybe half an hour to an hour each day. That's nothing when it comes to truly knowing someone. Was he unhinged? Emotional? Trying to seduce me? Dangerous? I had no idea, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. "Get off me," I said firmly, my voice shaking. "I'm leaving." I braced myself, half expecting him to lash out. Instead, he let go of my wrists and muttered something sinister under his breath, something like, "Stupid woman." Before I could respond, he grabbed his bag and stormed out of the lunchroom. I cracked the door open to make sure he was gone, then sprinted back to the front of the building to my office, tears streaming down my face. I burst into the office and told my co-workers everything. They were furious. They'd known I'd been eating lunch with Alan and had even teased me about my crush on the attractive guy. But they'd never suspected anything was off because I'd always seemed comfortable. They insisted we go upstairs immediately to report him to his company. I was shaky and scared, but I knew they'd go up there with or without me, so I agreed. Flanked by two co-workers, one of whom was my boss, we marched upstairs to confront Alan's company. As I explained what happened, the people from the upstairs company, a woman and a man, looked utterly confused. I described Alan, the HR manager, and what he'd done. Their response floored me. Their HR manager was a woman named Jules. There was no Alan working for them. We checked with every company in the building, and not one had an employee named Alan. Never had. It hit us like a ton of bricks. Alan wasn't who he said he was. He'd been coming into the building every day, eating lunch with me, pretending to be an office worker, and we had no idea why. We didn't know how he was getting in, whether he had the building code or a set of keys to the back entrance. The realization that he'd been wandering freely, unnoticed, was chilling. The building management acted quickly. They changed the locks, updated the key code, installed CCTV, which hadn't existed before, and put stricter security checks in place to monitor everyone entering the building. I never saw Alan again, and to this day, I don't know who he was, why he was there, or what his intentions were. I don't know what triggered his outburst that day, or what he might have done if I hadn't told him to get off me. All I know is that experience changed me. I'm a lot more careful now, a lot less trusting. I still think about how easily I let my guard down with someone who seemed so normal, so charming. It's a reminder that you never really know someone, especially not after just a few lunch breaks. I've never told many people about what happened to me growing up in Pine Grove. It's a small rural town where everybody knows everybody, which made it even harder to talk about the weird stuff I experienced. I was just a normal 10-year-old kid living with my grandma in her old house. It wasn't ancient or anything, built in the early 90s, but something about it never felt quite right. My grandma moved there after Grandpa died. It was supposed to be her fresh start, I guess. My parents weren't really in the picture. Mom had addiction problems and Dad worked oil rigs out of state, so it was just me and Grandma in this 2-story house at the edge of town. From the beginning, everyone talked about the house being haunted. Not in a serious, call the exorcist way, but more like how small towns keep little stories alive. There were supposedly 2 ghosts. The first one we called the hippie ghost, because whenever it was around, you'd smell this weird hair product, like something from the 70s or 80s. You'd only smell it near the front of Grandma's bedroom door. It wasn't scary, just strange. The second ghost was Larry, my grandma's brother who died in a farming accident back in the 80s. The weird thing about Larry was his cowboy hat. Grandma kept it hanging on the wall with a bunch of other hats, but only Larry's would randomly fall off while all the others stayed put. It happened at least once a month, and Grandma would just sigh and say, "Larry's restless today." I never thought much about these things until what happened when I was 10. I got into trouble. I don't even remember what for now, probably talking back or not doing chores. Grandma and I had a huge fight, and she sent me to my room. I remember lying on my bed, crying, facing the door, feeling sorry for myself like kids do. That's when I heard it, a deep, grumbling voice whispered right into my ear. "I know what you did." The voice was so close I felt the breath on my ear. I froze completely. My room was small, just a twin bed, a dresser, and a closet. I knew nobody else was in there. I was facing the only door, and nobody had come in. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just lay there, too terrified to move for what felt like hours. Eventually, I fell asleep from exhaustion, and when I woke up the next morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. My bedroom always felt off after that, especially the closet. I started sleeping with the closet door firmly shut, and sometimes I'd pile toys against it. Grandma thought I was being messy, but really, I was making a barrier. For a while, nothing else happened. Life went on normally, school, friends, video games. But when I turned 12, I got really interested in ghost stories and paranormal stuff. Looking back, maybe that was a mistake. It's like whatever was in that house noticed my interest and decided to show itself more. It started small. I'd come back to my room and find pencils or books moved from where I left them. Nothing major, just enough to make me question myself. Was I forgetting where I put things? Was Grandma moving my stuff while cleaning? Then things escalated. One afternoon, I was sitting at my desk doing homework when my eraser shot off the desk like someone had flicked it. There's nobody else in the room. I didn't touch it. It just moved on its own. A week later, my alarm clock got shoved off my nightstand while I was reading in bed. I clearly saw it slide off as if pushed by an invisible hand. My heart nearly stopped. The worst incident happened when I was 13. I was at my computer typing up a school report. I had a bowl of goldfish crackers next to me. I always snacked while doing homework. Suddenly, the bowl flew across the room and smashed against the wall. Not fell, not slid, flew. Like someone had picked it up and thrown it as hard as they could. Crackers went everywhere, and I just sat there, too shocked to move. Grandma came running up the stairs, asking what happened. I couldn't tell her the truth. She'd think I was making it up or had thrown it myself, so I lied and said I accidentally knocked it over reaching for something. She gave me this look like she didn't quite believe me, but didn't push it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the bowl, how much force it would take to throw it like that. Whatever was in my room was getting stronger, and I was terrified of what it might do next. A few nights later, I started hearing knocking. Not like house-settling noises, but deliberate, human-like knocking coming from my ceiling and walls. At first, I thought it was the pipes or maybe a tree branch, but it had a rhythm to it. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks, pause, 3 knocks again. One evening, I was taking a shower and heard the knocking above me. I don't know what came over me, curiosity, stupidity, or bravery, but I stood on the edge of the bathtub and knocked back 3 times. The silence that followed was the most terrifying moment of my life. Then it came 3 clear knocks in response, directly above where I was standing. I scrambled out of that bathroom so fast I nearly slipped and cracked my head open. I didn't tell Grandma. What would I say? Hey, I think I'm communicating with a ghost in our bathroom ceiling. She'd think I was losing it. Instead, I started researching. I'd stay late at the school library reading books about paranormal activity. I learned about poltergeists and how they often manifest around adolescence. Was that what was happening to me? Was I somehow causing this? Things got so bad that I begged Grandma to let me switch bedrooms. I told her mine was too small and I needed more space for my stuff. She finally agreed, and for a few weeks, everything was quiet in my new room down the hall. Then one morning, I woke up to find all my clothes from the dresser pulled out and scattered across the floor. Grandma accused me of making a mess, but I swore I didn't do it. We got into a huge fight about it. She thought I was lying to avoid getting in trouble. I couldn't convince her that something else was doing this. The final straw came when Grandma found me sleeping on the couch for the 3rd night in a row. I couldn't bear to be in any bedroom in that house anymore. She sat down and finally asked me what was really going on. I broke down and told her everything. The voice, the objects moving, the knocking. I expected her to dismiss it or tell me I was imagining things. Instead, she got very quiet and very pale. I hear things too, she finally said. I just didn't want to scare you. 2 weeks later, we moved. Grandma found a newer house on the other side of town, built just 5 years earlier. No previous owners, no history, no ghosts. Or so we thought. For the first month in the new house, everything was peaceful. I had a cool new room with a bunk bed. Even though it was just me, I took the top bunk because it made me feel safer, farther from the floor, from whatever might be lurking in the shadows. Then it started again. The spoon dragged itself off my desk while I was studying. I actually watched it move, an inch at a time, until it fell to the floor. The fairy lights I'd strung up around my ceiling began flickering when there were no power issues anywhere else in the house. But the worst thing, the absolute worst, happened when I was almost 14. I woke up in the middle of the night but couldn't move, sleep paralysis, I learned later. I was frozen on my top bunk, staring at the ladder. That's when I saw it, climbing up toward me, a misshapen black figure, like a shadow but solid somehow. It had no features except for a face, and even that wasn't really a face, just a cartoon-like gaping smile that stretched too wide across where a head should be. It was pulling itself up the ladder rung by rung, coming for me. I tried to scream. I tried to move. Nothing happened. I was trapped in my own body while this thing got closer and closer. When it reached the top of the ladder, it just stopped. It stared at me with that horrible smile for what felt like hours. Then it disappeared, like someone had switched off a projector. I didn't sleep for 2 days after that. When exhaustion finally forced me to sleep, came back. Sometimes as the black figure with a smile, sometimes as a thin white figure standing across the room, just watching me. It never made a sound. It never touched me. It just watched. I started sleeping with all the lights on. I'd set up my portable DVD player to run movies all night, so there was always noise and light. Grandma worried about the electricity bill, but didn't make me stop. The strange thing is, when I turned 14, everything just stopped. The figures disappeared. Objects stayed where I put them. The knocking never returned. It was like whatever had followed me around for 4 years suddenly lost interest. I'm 19 now, in college, 3 states away from Pine Grove. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, if it was just an overactive imagination or some kind of stress response to living without my parents. But then I remember the voice in my ear, the bull flying across the room, that terrible grinning shadow climbing toward me, and I know it was real. I still don't know what it was or why it targeted me. I don't know why it stopped when I turned 14, or if it might someday come back. All I know is that for 4 years of my childhood, something was watching me, playing with me, scaring me. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my dorm room late at night, I catch myself listening for knocking. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks, pause, 3 knocks again. And I wonder if I knock back now, would anything answer? I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened that summer in River Hollow. I've never shared this with anyone outside my closest friends, but I need to get it off my chest. This happened almost 11 years ago when I was 13, but the memory is still crystal clear in my mind. It was early August, one of those scorching hot days where the air feels thick and heavy. My friends, Amber, Zach, and Jamie, and I were riding our bikes around town, trying to find ways to escape the heat. We lived in River Hollow, a small town where everyone pretty much knew everyone else, the kind of place where nothing exciting ever happens, except for that day. We were pedaling down Cedar Lane, racing each other and laughing about some stupid joke Zach had made when I noticed the old Anderson house up ahead. The house had been abandoned since the 70s, at least that's what my mom always told me. It was this massive, Victorian-style home with peeling paint and overgrown weeds in the yard. The town had been trying to get it demolished for years, but there was always some holdup with paperwork or ownership disputes. As we rode past, I happened to glance up at one of the second-floor windows. The curtains moved, not like they were being blown by the wind, like someone had pulled them aside to look out. "Hey, did you guys see that?" I called out, skidding my bike to a stop. "See what?" Jamie asked, circling back to where I stood. "I swear someone just looked out that window." I pointed to the second floor. "No way," Amber said, pushing her sweaty bangs out of her eyes. "That place has been empty for decades. Maybe it's homeless people," Zach suggested with a shrug, "or teenagers looking for a place to hook up." We all stood there for a minute, staring at the house. The windows were grimy, and most of the curtains were tattered and yellowed with age. I was about to admit I was probably seeing things when we heard it. The unmistakable sound of a baby crying. It wasn't loud, but in the quiet of that summer afternoon, it carried across the yard clear as day. We all froze, exchanging wide-eyed glances. "Did you hear that?" Jamie whispered, her voice tight with tension. We all nodded. "There's a baby in there," Amber said, dropping her bike on the sidewalk. "We need to check it out." "Are you crazy?" I hissed. "We can't just walk into someone's house." "It's abandoned, Megan," Zach pointed out. "And if there's really a baby in there." The crying came again, louder this time. It made my skin prickle with goosebumps despite the summer heat. "Maybe we should call the police," I suggested, but even as I said it, I was already leaning my bike against the rusted iron fence that surrounded the property. "And tell them what?" Jamie said with nervous glances at each other. "That we heard a baby crying in an abandoned house? They'll think we're pranking them." We made our way up the cracked concrete path to the front door. The porch steps creaked under our weight, and I remember thinking that at any moment they might give way beneath us. Up close, the house looked even worse. The paint wasn't just peeling, it was hanging off in long strips like dead skin. "Should we knock?" Amber whispered when we reached the door. "I guess," Jamie replied, though none of us moved to do it. Finally, Zach stepped forward and rapped his knuckles against the door. The hollow sound echoed through what I imagined was an empty house. We waited, holding our breath. Nothing happened. He knocked again, harder this time. To our shock, we heard footsteps coming toward the door. My heart started hammering in my chest. The footsteps stopped, and then the door opened just a crack. A woman peered out at us. She looked to be about 40, with dark hair pulled back from her face and deep circles under her eyes. She was wearing an old-fashioned dress that seemed out of place, like something from another era. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice flat and motionless. We all stood there speechless for a moment until Jamie finally spoke up. We heard a baby crying. Is everything okay?" The woman's face hardened. "There's no baby here. You kids need to leave." Just then, as if to contradict her, the crying started again. It was definitely coming from inside the house. The woman's eyes darted nervously over her shoulder. "Please go away," she said, her voice taking on an edge of desperation. "It's not safe for you here." She began to close the door, but Zach impulsively stuck his foot in the gap. "We just want to make sure the baby is all right. Get out." The woman suddenly screamed, her face contorting with rage. "Get out now." Zach jumped back, pulling his foot away, and the door slammed shut. We all backed away, staring at each other in shock. "That was weird," Amber whispered, her face pale. "Really weird," I agreed. Maybe we should call the police after all. But the crying had started again, more insistent now. It sounded like the baby was in distress. "We can't just leave," Jamie said. She walked over to one of the front windows and tried to peek in, but the curtains were drawn. "Let's try the back," Zach suggested. We crept around the side of the house, stepping carefully through the overgrown weeds and debris that littered the yard. The crying seemed to grow louder as we moved, almost as if it was following us. At the back of the house, we found a door that led into what must have been the kitchen. Jamie reached out and tried the handle. To our surprise, it turned easily. "It's open," she whispered. "We shouldn't be doing this," I said, suddenly feeling a wave of unease wash over me. "This is breaking and entering. We're just checking on a baby," Amber assured me, though she didn't sound convinced. "If something's wrong, we need to help." Before I could protest further, Zach pushed the door open and stepped inside. The rest of us, not wanting to be left outside alone, quickly followed. The kitchen was dark and musty, with a thick layer of dust covering every surface. It looked like no one had used it in years. The linoleum floor was cracked and peeling, and the cabinets hung open, empty except for cobwebs. "This place is abandoned," I whispered, my voice seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet space. "Then who was that woman, and where's the baby?" Jamie asked. The crying had stopped momentarily, making the silence feel heavy and oppressive. Then it started again, coming from somewhere upstairs. "Hello," Zach called out. "We're not trying to cause trouble. We're just worried about the baby." No response, just more crying. "Let's split up," Amber suggested. "Megan and I will check upstairs. You two look around down here." Normally, I would have argued against splitting up in a creepy abandoned house, but something about the baby's cries made me feel like we needed to hurry. So I nodded, and Amber and I headed for the staircase in the main hall. The stairs creaked and groaned under our weight. I kept one hand on the banister, which was coated in a layer of dust so thick it left smudges on my palm. The upstairs hallway was dimly lit by the afternoon sun filtering through dirty windows. There were several doors leading off the hall, all closed. "Where should we start?" I whispered to Amber. As if in answer, the crying started again, clearly coming from behind the door at the end of the hall. We exchanged nervous glances and slowly made our way toward it. The floorboards creaked with every step, and I remember thinking how strange it was that a place so obviously abandoned could have a woman and a baby living in it. There were no signs of habitation, no lights, no sounds other than the crying, no smell of food or life, just dust and decay. When we reached the door, Amber hesitated, then turned the knob. The door swung open with a long, ominous creak. The room beyond was a nursery. Faded wallpaper with a pattern of ducks and bunnies peeled from the walls. There was a small wooden rocking chair in one corner and a changing table against the wall, and in the center of the room was an old-fashioned baby carriage, its once white paint now yellowed with age. The crying was definitely coming from the carriage. "Hello," Amber called softly as we stepped into the room. "Is anyone here?" No answer, just the continued crying. We approached the carriage slowly. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. When we finally reached it and peered inside, what we saw, or rather, what we didn't see, made my blood run cold. The carriage was empty, but the crying was definitely coming from inside it, as loud and clear as if there really was a baby lying there. What the hell? Amber breathed, her face going pale. I couldn't speak. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what we were seeing or not seeing. I reached out a trembling hand toward the empty space where the sound was coming from. The moment my fingers entered the carriage, the temperature around my hand plummeted. It felt like I'd stuck my hand in a freezer, and the crying suddenly stopped. I yanked my hand back as if I'd been burned. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice shaking. Now, just then, we heard Zach and Jamie calling from downstairs, their voices high-pitched with panic. "Megan, Ember, come down here." We raced out of the nursery and back to the stairs, taking them two at a time despite the danger of the rotted wood. When we reached the bottom, we found Zach and Jamie standing in the front hallway, both looking like they'd seen a ghost. "What happened?" I demanded. "The woman," Jamie said, her voice trembling. "We saw her walk into the kitchen, but when we followed her, she was gone. There's no way out of that kitchen except the way we came in, but she just vanished. The carriage upstairs is empty," Amber told them, "but the crying was definitely coming from it." "We need to go," Zach said, already backing toward the front door. "This place is seriously messed up." None of us argued. We hurried to the door, which Zach threw open, and spilled out onto the porch. We didn't stop running until we reached our bikes at the edge of the property. As I was grabbing my bike, I glanced back at the house. The front door was slowly closing, as if someone was gently pulling it shut from the inside. Then I heard the distinct click of a lock turning. A moment later, the curtains in the upstairs nursery window were pulled back. The woman stood there, but this time she was holding a baby in her arms. She was smiling, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was cold and knowing, like she was enjoying our fear. She raised one hand and wiggled her fingers in a mocking wave. I didn't wait to see more. I jumped on my bike and pedaled away as fast as I could, the others right behind me. We didn't talk about what happened for days. When we finally did, we all agreed on one thing: we would never go back to that house again. About 3 years later, the Anderson house was finally demolished. I remember feeling relieved when I heard the news, like a weight had been lifted from the town. But then the story started. People began reporting sightings of a woman holding a baby near the local parks and bridges, always at dusk, always standing still and watching families with young children. Some people said she would smile and wave at them, but if they approached, she would vanish. River Hollow has always had its share of ghost stories. There's the one about the child who drowned in the sewers during a flood in the 50s, whose laughter can sometimes be heard from storm drains on rainy days. But the woman with the baby became the town's most frequently reported apparition. I'm 24 now, and I've moved away from River Hollow for college and work, but I still go back to visit my parents a few times a year. Whenever I do, I avoid driving down Cedar Lane. There's a park there now, where the Anderson house once stood, but I can't bring myself to go near it. The last time I had to drive past it, there was construction on the main road, forcing a detour. I felt the same chill I'd experienced when I put my hand in that empty carriage. The park was empty, too quiet, like the world was holding its breath as I passed. I glanced over and saw a woman standing beneath a tree, a bundle in her arms. I didn't slow down to see if she waved. I still don't know what we encountered that day. Was it really a ghost, some kind of residual haunting, or something else entirely? All I know is that 11 years later, the memory of that empty carriage and the sound of a baby crying where no baby could be still keeps me up at night. And sometimes, when it's very quiet, I swear I can still hear it crying. I've never been the type to believe in ghost stories. Growing up, I was always the kid who'd roll my eyes whenever someone started talking about paranormal stuff at sleepovers. My dad's a physics teacher, so I guess that skepticism runs in the family. He taught me early on that energy can't just float around as disembodied spirits. It has to follow the laws of thermodynamics. That's why what happened last month has completely messed with my head. I still don't have an explanation, and it's driving me crazy. Some background. I live in Elmage, a small rural town where nothing exciting ever happens. Our house is pretty old, built in the 70s, and has this weird layout with an unfinished storage space attached to the back. For years, it was just this dusty room where we kept Christmas decorations and camping gear. When I turned 17 last fall, my dad finally agreed that I'd outgrown sharing a room with my younger brother Tyler. So we started converting that storage space into what would be my new bedroom. The project was supposed to take a few weeks, but you know how these things go. My dad works full-time, so we only had weekends to work on it. 3 months in, and we'd only managed to put up drywall and run electrical wiring. No windows installed yet, just these plastic sheets covering the window openings. The floor was still bare concrete, and there was no proper door, just a piece of plywood we'd prop up when I needed privacy. Before I get to what happened, I should mention the creek. About 50 yards behind our property runs this small creek that Tyler and I practically lived at during summers growing up. One spot in particular became our favorite hangout, where the creek passes under Henderson Road through this big metal pipe, maybe 4 feet in diameter. Cool in summer, sheltered when it rained. When we were kids, Tyler got this idea in his head that the pipe was haunted. He swore he could hear whispering coming from inside it when the water was low. I always told him it was just the wind or water dripping, but he was convinced. He even made up this elaborate story about a 12-year-old girl named Lily, who supposedly drowned there during a flash flood back in the 80s. According to Tyler's made-up legend, Lily needed to kiss a boy her age to pass on or whatever. Pretty stupid, right? But I have to admit, sometimes when we'd play down there, I'd hear these weird knocking sounds from inside the pipe, almost like someone tapping metal with their knuckles. I always found logical explanations, thermal expansion, rocks being carried by the current, whatever, but Tyler would freak out every time. "That's Lily trying to get our attention," he'd say, and then run home. By the time I was 14, I'd outgrown the creek. Tyler still went down there sometimes with his friends, doing the same dumb stuff we used to do. Daring each other to walk through the pipe, telling ghost stories, the usual kid stuff. Anyway, back to what happened in my unfinished bedroom. It was a Friday in March, and my dad and I had spent the whole day putting up more drywall. The room was slowly taking shape. We'd marked where my bed would go, where we'd put my desk, all that. I was getting really impatient about moving in. Sharing with an annoying 13-year-old brother was becoming unbearable, especially since he developed this habit of talking in his sleep. That night, I got this idea that I'd just camp out in the unfinished room. My sleeping bag was decent, and even though it was still March and a bit chilly, I figured I'd be fine. My dad thought I was being ridiculous, but didn't stop me. "Just don't complain about the cold at breakfast," he said. I set up my sleeping bag in the corner where my bed would eventually go, brought in my phone charger, the outlets were working at least, and a battery-powered lantern. After my parents went to bed around 11 o'clock, I settled in. It was actually kind of cool, like camping, but inside. The plastic over the window frames crinkled whenever the wind blew, and there were all these little construction noises, the new drywall settling, nails contracting in a cooling temperature, that sort of thing. I must have fallen asleep around midnight. I don't remember dreaming, but I woke up suddenly around 3 o'clock in the morning. You know that feeling when you just snap awake for no reason? It was like that. The room was pitch black. I turned off my lantern to save battery, and dead silent. Even the wind had stopped. I lay there for a few minutes trying to figure out what had woken me. That's when I noticed it. There was a faint light moving across the wall opposite me. At first, I thought it might be headlights from a car passing on the road, but then I remembered there were no windows installed yet, just plastic sheeting stapled over the frames. No way could car lights shine through like that. The light wasn't bright, more like a soft glow, yellowish white. It moved slowly in an arc across the wall, then it disappeared. A few seconds later, another one appeared, following roughly the same path. Then another. It reminded me of something. When we were kids, Tyler and I used to sit in his room and watch the reflection of car headlights sweep across his wall at night. He always pretended it was Lily from the pipe trying to manifest herself. I'd tell him he was an idiot, that it was just cars turning the corner by our house. But this was different. These lights couldn't be explained by passing cars. They were too contained, too deliberate in their movement. And again, no actual windows for light to come through. I sat up in my sleeping bag, heart suddenly pounding. The rational part of my brain started cycling through explanations. Maybe my dad or mom had gotten up and were walking around outside with a flashlight. But why would they be circling the house at 3 o'clock in the morning? I reached for my phone to use as a light, and that's when things got even weirder. As soon as I moved, the lights on the wall stopped completely. Froze. Like whatever was making them had suddenly become aware of me. My hand hovered over my phone. The temperature in the room seemed to drop about 10 degrees in an instant. I could see my breath fogging in front of my face. The frozen light on the wall began to change shape. It stretched vertically, becoming taller and narrower, almost like the silhouette of a person. I'm not making this up. I watched as this formless glow reshaped itself into what looked like the outline of a small, thin figure. My entire body went cold. Logic and physics suddenly seemed very distant concepts. I couldn't move, couldn't look away from the light figure on my wall. Then it started moving again, but differently now. Not the smooth arc from before, but jerky, almost like it was walking. The light figure moved across the wall, heading toward the corner of the room closest to the creek behind our property. I don't know what possessed me in that moment, but I whispered, "Hello." The response was immediate and terrifying. The light vanished. Not faded, not dimmed, just gone in an instant, like someone had flipped a switch. The room went pitch black again, and the temperature returned to normal so quickly it was like the cold had never happened. I scrambled for my phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping it around the room. Nothing. Just bare drywall, plastic-covered window openings, and concrete floor. No source for the lights I'd seen. No explanation for the cold. I like to say I bolted from the room and ran to my parents' bedroom like a scared kid, but I didn't. Instead, I just sat there, flashlight pointed at the wall where the light figure had been, trying to make sense of what I'd witnessed. I didn't sleep another minute that night. The next morning, I casually asked my dad if he'd gotten up during the night or been outside the house for any reason. He hadn't. My mom hadn't either. And Tyler had been at a friend's sleepover. I was home alone with my parents, and neither of them had been anywhere near my unfinished room. Later that day, I walked down to the creek, something I hadn't done in years. The water was higher than usual from spring rain, rushing through the pipe with a gurgling sound. I stood there staring at it, half expecting something. I don't know what. Nothing happened, of course, just water flowing through a metal pipe under a road. But while I was standing there, I remembered something else about Tyler's stupid ghost story. He'd always said that Lily didn't just drown in the pipe. He claimed she got trapped at the far end, the end closest to our house. The end that, if you traced a straight line from it, would point almost exactly to my unfinished bedroom. I spent the next few days researching local history, even asking the librarian if there had ever been accidents at Henderson Creek. Nothing about a girl drowning. Nothing about any deaths there at all, which was exactly what I expected. Tyler had made the whole thing up. And yet, those lights, that cold, the way it reacted when I spoke to it. I told myself I wouldn't sleep in the unfinished room again until it was completed. But curiosity is a powerful thing. 1 week later, I found myself setting up my sleeping bag in exactly the same spot. This time, I brought a video camera, my dad's old one that he used to record family vacations. I set it up on a stack of paint cans, pointing at the wall where I'd seen the lights, and let it record all night. Nothing happened. I slept through till morning. No disturbances. When I reviewed the footage, all I saw was a dark wall, occasionally illuminated by the green recording light on the camera itself. I tried again the next night. Same result. After the third night of nothing, I was starting to think I'd imagined the whole thing, or maybe dreamed it. But I know what I saw. Those lights moved with purpose, with awareness. They responded to me. About 2 weeks after the incident, we finally installed the windows in my new room. A few days after that, we put in carpeting and moved my bed from the shared room with Tyler into my new space. The first night sleeping in my completed bedroom, I lay awake staring at the wall, almost hoping to see those strange lights again, just to prove to myself I wasn't crazy. Nothing appeared. But at exactly 3:15 in the morning, I checked the time on my phone. I heard it, 3 distinct knocks, seemingly coming from the wall closest to the creek. Not loud, but clear, deliberate, like someone gently rapping their knuckles against the inside of the wall. I froze, waiting for more. But that was it. 3 knocks, then silence. I've been in my new room for about a month now. I haven't seen the lights again, but the knocking happens regularly. Always 3 knocks. Always at exactly 3:15 a.m. I've tried knocking back, but there's never any response when I do. I still don't believe in ghosts. They violate everything I understand about how the universe works. Energy can't just float around with consciousness in no physical form. It's impossible. But I can't explain what I saw that night in my unfinished bedroom. I can't explain the knocks that wake me up at the same time every morning. And I can't explain why last week, when I walked down to the creek after a heavy rainfall, I found a small weathered hair ribbon caught among the rocks at the mouth of the pipe. Faded pink, frayed at the edges, like it had been in the water for years. I'm not saying it's Lily. That would be ridiculous. She doesn't exist. But something's trying to get my attention. Something that shouldn't exist according to the laws of physics. Something I still can't bring myself to believe in, even though it's right there in my room with me every night at 3:15 in the morning. I haven't told anyone about this. Not my parents, not Tyler, nobody. They'd either think I was making it up or losing my mind. Sometimes I think maybe I am. But then 3:15 comes around and the knocking starts, and I know what I experienced was real. The lights in that unfinished room were real. The question is, what were they trying to show me? And why me? I never thought my family home was haunted. Not really. It's just a small wooden house on stilts along the Willow Creek riverbank in Maplewood. Nothing special to look at, just weathered gray, but that's been standing since right after the First World War. My dad grew up there, and his dad before him. When I was little, I didn't know our house had any secrets. I wish someone had warned me. The first time it happened, I was about 10. My sister Lily and I were playing near my grandpa's old workshop cabin, about 50 yards into the woods behind our house. It was summer, hot and sticky, and we'd been catching frogs all afternoon. The cabin was nothing fancy, just a small wooden structure my grandfather built when my dad was a kid. Nobody really used it anymore, except for storing old garden tools and fishing gear. There was this old mirror attached to the back porch of the cabin. It was tarnished around the edges and had a crack running through one corner. Dad always said Grandpa kept it there to check himself for ticks after working in the woods. We were gathering up our things to head back home for dinner when I happened to glance at the mirror. That's when I saw him. In the reflection, a dark-skinned man with massive forearms was standing at the edge of the trees. He wore a white t-shirt with the sleeves cut off, work pants, and had this distinctive way of standing, kind of slouched to one side. My first thought was that it was my dad coming to call us in for dinner. But something fell off. The build was similar, but this man didn't have any of Dad's tattoos. My father has a full sleeve of nautical tattoos on his left arm, impossible to miss. This man's arms were bare. Dad, I called out, turning around to look directly at the tree line. There's nobody there, just empty woods. I spun back to the mirror, but the reflection was normal again. Just me, wide-eyed and confused, and Lily gathering up her bucket of frogs behind me. Who are you talking to? Lily asked, not even looking up. I thought I saw Dad, I said, still staring at the empty spot in the mirror where the man had been. Well, he's not here, she said matter-of-factly. Come on, I'm hungry. I remember the walk back to the house feeling longer than usual. I kept looking over my shoulder, certain someone was watching us, but the forest was quiet except for the normal summer sounds of cicadas and distant frogs. I didn't tell my parents what I saw. It seemed silly in the bright light of our kitchen as Mom dished out spaghetti and Dad complained about his day at work. But that night, I made sure my bedroom door was locked. For almost 2 years, nothing else happened. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing, a trick of light on an old mirror maybe. Then, when I was 12, something happened that I couldn't explain away. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October. I remember because I'd just gotten home from school and was struggling with math homework at the kitchen table. Mom was at her part-time job at the library, and Lily was at soccer practice. I was home alone, or so I thought. I heard the distinctive sound of our front door opening, the way it always sticks a little before swinging all the way open. Then came the familiar thud of heavy work boots being kicked off in the entryway, followed by the creak of the floorboard by the coat rack that always announces when someone is walking into the living room. "Dad," I called out, confused, because he shouldn't have been home for hours. No answer. But I heard the unmistakable groan of his old recliner as someone sat down in it. The chair had this specific sound, a sort of leather and spring protest that was as familiar to me as my father's voice. "Dad, I need help with this problem," I said, grabbing my math notebook and walking into the living room. The recliner was empty. Completely empty. The leather was still indented as if someone had just been sitting there, but there was no one in the room. I checked every room in the house, my heart hammering in my chest. Nothing. No one. When I returned to the living room, even the indent in the chair was gone. Later, when my dad actually came home, I casually asked if he'd come back earlier that day. "No, Becky," he said, looking at me strangely. "I was at the construction site all day." "Why?" I mumbled something about hearing noises and left it at that. What was I supposed to say? That I'd heard him come home when he hadn't. That I'd heard his chair creak under invisible weight. He'd think I was making things up for attention. The occurrences became more frequent after that. Small things, mostly. Items moved from where I'd left them. Doors that I knew I'd closed standing open. The sensation of someone watching me when I was alone in the house. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. Then came the kitchen incident when I was 14. I was sitting at the table sketching. I'd gotten really into drawing that year. Mom was in the backyard hanging laundry, and Dad was in the living room on the phone with his brother, their voices a distant murmur. I heard footsteps coming down the hallway, heavy and deliberate, the kind Dad makes in his work boots. I didn't look up right away, focused on getting the shading right on my drawing. The footsteps stopped just behind me, and I felt the presence of someone looking over my shoulder at my artwork. I could even smell the familiar scent of Dad's aftershave mixed with the sawdust that always clung to his clothes. "It's not finished yet," I said, still not looking up. There was no answer, but I felt a hand rest briefly on my shoulder. It was heavy and warm, and the touch was gentle in a way that made me feel safe. I smiled and finally turned around. There was a man standing there, but it wasn't my father. It was the same man I'd seen in the mirror years before. Dark skin, powerful arms with no tattoos, white sleeveless shirt. He was looking down at my drawing with a smile on his face, nodding slightly as if in approval. I screamed. I couldn't help it. The sound tore from my throat before I even realized what was happening. The man's image seemed to waver, like heat rising from hot pavement, and then he was gone. Just gone. Not like he'd walked away or ducked out of sight. He literally vanished in front of me. My dad came running from the living room, phone abandoned, and Mom burst through the back door seconds later. "What happened?" "Are you hurt?" Dad demanded, looking around wildly. "There was a man," I sobbed. "Right here." Looking at my drawing, they searched the entire house, checked all the locks, called the neighbors. Nobody had seen anyone enter or leave our property. Dad called the police, who took my description but looked skeptical. I heard one of them mutter something about teenage imagination when they thought I wasn't listening. For weeks after that, I refused to be alone in the house. My parents were worried about me, I could tell. Mom suggested I talk to someone, counselor or therapist, but I refused. What would I say? That I was seeing a ghost that looked kind of like my dad but wasn't? It wasn't until I was 16 that I finally understood what was happening. We were visiting my Aunt Carol, my dad's older sister, who lived about 2 hours away. I had never spent much time at her house before. Family gatherings were usually at our place since we had more room. While the adults were catching up in the kitchen, I wandered around the living room looking at the family photos displayed on her walls. There were old black and white ones I'd never seen before, pictures of relatives I didn't recognize, and then I saw it. A photo that made my blood freeze. It was a picture of my father as a young man, maybe 20, standing next to an older man. They had the same build, the same stance, that slight slouch to one side. The older man wore a white t-shirt with the sleeves cut off, exposing muscular arms without any tattoos. His skin was dark from years in the sun, his face weathered but kind, with the same eyes as my father. I must have been staring at it for a long time, because Aunt Carol came up behind me. "That's your Grandpa Thomas," she said fondly. "That picture was taken about a year before he passed. You never got to meet him. He died before you were born." My mouth went dry. What was he like? "Oh, he was a good man, quiet but always watching out for everyone. He built that house you live in, and that little cabin in the woods. He loved that old place, used to spend hours out there working on his projects." My hands started trembling. Did he? Did he have any special way he dressed?" Aunt Carol laughed. "Lord, yes. Drove your grandmother crazy, always cutting the sleeves off his shirts. Said it was too hot to work with him on. And he had these massive forearms from all his years of carpentry work. Strong as an ox, your grandfather was. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. You okay, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost," Aunt Carol said, touching my arm gently. If only she knew how right she was. I took a photo of that picture with my phone, and when we got home, I spent hours studying it. There was no doubt in my mind. The man I'd been seeing around our house for years was my grandfather, the grandfather I'd never met, who died before I was born. Strangely, knowing it was him made me feel better, not worse. There was nothing threatening about his appearances. He never tried to scare me or hurt me. He was just there, watching over the house he'd built, checking in on his family. I even found myself looking for him sometimes, hoping to catch a glimpse. For a while, things were peaceful. I'd occasionally feel his presence, that distinctive heavy footfall, the smell of sawdust and aftershave, the sensation of being watched. But it wasn't frightening anymore. That changed when I was 17. It was a Friday night in November. My parents were out at a friend's dinner party, and Lily was at a sleepover. I was alone in the house, watching TV in the living room. Around 11 o'clock, I went to my parents' bedroom to grab another blanket from their closet. The old house got drafty in the fall. I didn't turn on the overhead light, just used the hallway light spilling through the doorway. As I was pulling a quilt from the top shelf of their closet, I had that familiar feeling of being watched. Thinking it might be my grandfather, I turned around with a small smile. What I saw wasn't my grandfather. In the corner of my parents' room, partially hidden by the shadows, was a small, dark figure. At first, I thought it might be a pile of clothes, but then it moved. It was low to the ground, no taller than maybe 3 feet, but it wasn't shaped like a child. Its proportions were all wrong. Arms too long, head too large for its body, and rising from its head were what looked like 2 small, pointed protrusions, horns. They looked like horns. The thing tilted its head, studying me with eyes I couldn't see but could feel. Then it moved. Not walking, not crawling, but flowing across the floor like a mixture of smoke and water. The movement was so unnatural, so wrong, that I couldn't even scream. I stood frozen, clutching the quilt to my chest as if it could protect me. The creature slid closer, still keeping to the shadows. I could hear a sound now, like wet cloth being dragged across the floor. The temperature in the room dropped so suddenly that I could see my breath fogging in front of me. I managed to take 1 step backward, and that's when the thing rushed toward me, moving faster than anything I'd ever seen. In the split second before it reached me, the bedroom door slammed shut with such force that the whole house seemed to shake. I heard that thing hit the door with a wet thud from the other side. Then silence. My legs gave out and I collapsed onto my parents' bed, shaking uncontrollably. I don't know how long I sat there before I found the courage to move. The door remained closed, and somehow I knew it was keeping that thing away from me. When I finally got up and checked, the hallway was empty. The thing was gone, but so was the comforting presence I'd come to associate with my grandfather. It was as if the entire house had been emptied of anything spiritual or otherworldly. My parents found me asleep on their bed when they got home, surrounded by every light in their room turned on. I told them I'd fallen asleep watching TV on their bed. I couldn't bring myself to tell them what had happened. For weeks after that, the house felt different. No more phantom footsteps, no feeling of being watched. Even the familiar creaks and groans of the old house seemed subdued. I missed my grandfather's presence but was relieved that the other entity hadn't returned. Then, about a month later, I was alone in the kitchen doing homework when I heard the front door open, followed by the sound of boots being removed in the entryway. The familiar creak of the floorboard by the coat rack. The smell of sawdust. I didn't look up immediately, afraid of what I might see. But when a heavy, warm hand settled gently on my shoulder, I knew. Grandpa Thomas was back, standing guard over his family and his home. I've never seen the dark entity again. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my grandfather hadn't intervened that night, what that thing wanted, where it came from. But mostly I'm just grateful for the protective presence that still walks our halls, checking in on us decades after his physical body is gone. I still live in that house. My parents gave it to me when they moved to Florida 5 years ago. Some people think I'm crazy for wanting to stay in a haunted house, but they don't understand. Not all hauntings are about terror and torment. Sometimes they're about love that reaches beyond the grave, about family connections that even death can't sever. I've remodeled parts of the house, but I've never touched the cabin in the woods or the mirror on its back porch. Sometimes when I'm feeling lost or alone, I walk out there and look in that tarnished glass. More often than not, I catch a glimpse of a dark-skinned man with massive forearms watching over me, making sure I'm okay. I've learned to wave and say hello. After all, it's only polite to greet your family when you see them. I've been putting off sharing this story for years. I'm not sure why I'm finally writing it now. Maybe because enough time has passed, or because I need to get this off my chest. What happened to me in the Norwegian mountains 10 years ago still gives me nightmares. I was 16 then, and it was supposed to be a special hunting trip with my father. I just got my hunting license that month, and my father had given me my first real shotgun for my birthday, a Beretta over-under 12 gauge. It was beautiful, and I was so proud to finally be going on a real hunting trip, not just tagging along with Dad like I had since I was little, but actually hunting myself. We were headed to our family's cabin in northern Norway, way up in the Arctic wilderness. Cabin is probably too generous a word. It's basically a shack with a wood stove, no electricity, and definitely no running water or toilets. Getting there is an ordeal itself. First, you take a ferry to this tiny harbor, then you need to take a small boat for about an hour to reach the property. It's completely isolated, which was the whole point. Great hunting, no other people. It was late October, already bitterly cold with snow that fell early that year. We were the only passengers getting off at the remote harbor, which wasn't unusual. The ferry operator knew my dad and just nodded at us as we unloaded our gear. I remember him looking at the sky and warning Dad about some weather coming in, but Dad just laughed it off. He'd been making this trip for 30 years and knew the area like the back of his hand. By the time we got to the cabin in our little aluminum boat, it was almost dark. We unloaded quickly, got the wood stove going, and settled in. Dad broke out a bottle of whiskey, the first time he'd ever offered me anything stronger than a beer. I felt like I was finally being treated as an adult, sitting there with my father as he told old hunting stories I'd heard a dozen times before, but somehow they felt different now. We planned to hunt grouse the next day. Dad had built this lavvo, it's like a teepee-style shelter, by the frozen lake about 2 kilometers from the main cabin. The idea was that I'd go up into the mountains to hunt while he stayed at the lavvo and got a fire going for when I returned. That night, I barely slept, partly excitement, partly the unfamiliar burn of whiskey in my teenage stomach, but also this strange sense of unease I couldn't shake. The wind howled around the cabin, and I kept thinking I heard something moving outside. Dad snored through it all. We got a late start the next morning. The sun doesn't really rise that time of year in northern Norway. You get a few hours of grayish twilight, and that's it. Dad helped me check my gear. Shotgun shells, knife, extra layers, thermos of hot chocolate, some sandwiches and chocolate bars, standard stuff. He showed me on the map where I should head and where to meet him later at the lavvo. Don't go beyond the ridge, he warned me. Weather changes fast up there. I nodded, excited to be heading out on my own. I strapped on the snowshoes Dad had taught me to use since I was a kid and started trudging through the deep snow, heading up the mountain. Dad headed toward the lake to set up the lavo. At first, it was amazing. The silence of the mountain was broken only by the squeak of my snowshoes and my breathing. I started noticing animal tracks everywhere, hare, fox, and what looked like grouse tracks. It was a hunter's paradise. But the strangest thing was, despite all the tracks, I didn't see a single animal. Not one. It was like they'd all just disappeared. After about an hour of climbing, I realized how eerily quiet it had become. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just this absolute stillness that felt wrong. Anyone who's spent time in nature knows it's never actually silent. There's always something. Branches creaking, birds calling, the rustle of small animals. But there was nothing. Growing up in Norway, you're raised on folklore. My grandmother used to terrify me with stories of the huldra, a forest creature that lures men, or the knock, that drowns people in lakes and rivers, and the myling, the invisible ghost of an abandoned child that you can hear but never see. As a teenager, I pretended those stories didn't affect me anymore, but alone on that silent mountain, they all came flooding back. I kept going despite the growing knot in my stomach. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I was 16, for God's sake, not 6. Around midday, I reached a small clearing that overlooked the frozen lake below. I could just make out a tiny speck that must have been the lavo my father was setting up. I decided to take a break, sitting on a fallen log to have some chocolate and hot chocolate from my thermos. And that's when I heard it, footsteps. Heavy footsteps, crunching through the snow, coming from the forest behind me. I froze, chocolate bar halfway to my mouth. The sound was unmistakable, the compressed sound of snow under weight, but with a rhythm that could only be made by something walking on 2 legs. Dad. I called out, hoping somehow it was him, though I knew he was down by the lake. No answer. Just those footsteps getting closer. I stood up, heart pounding. Hello? Is someone there? The footsteps kept coming, slow and deliberate. I fumbled for my phone. We barely had reception out here, but sometimes you could get a text through. I managed to send one to my dad. Are you still at the lavo? I stood there, shotgun now gripped tightly in my hands, waiting. The footsteps were getting louder, closer, but I still couldn't see anything through the trees. My phone buzzed. A miracle, it had got through. Dad, yes? Where are you? Everything okay? That confirmation sent ice through my veins. Whatever was walking toward me wasn't my father. It wasn't human, I didn't think. I just ran. Panicked, I took off in the direction of the lake, toward where I knew my father was. I was practically jumping through the hip-deep snow, my snowshoes catching and nearly making me fall several times. The fear was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, pure animal terror. And the thing followed. I could hear it crashing through the snow behind me. The most terrifying part was how the footsteps seemed to match my own, step for step, but with just a slight delay, like it was deliberately mimicking me. I risked a glance back and saw nothing. Nothing but the trail I was leaving in the snow, and what looked like another trail forming behind it, as if being made by something invisible. The footsteps sounded like they were just meters behind me, but every time I looked, there was nothing there. Just the sound getting closer, matching my pace. I ran until my lungs burned, down a mountain, through the forest, stumbling, sometimes crawling through the deep snow when I fell. All the while those footsteps stayed right behind me, never falling back, never gaining ground, just following. When I finally broke through the tree line onto the frozen lake, the footsteps stopped. Just like that. Cut off as clearly as if someone had flipped a switch. I stood at the edge of the ice, gasping for breath, too afraid to look back, but finally forcing myself to turn around. Nothing. The forest edge was still silent again, but I could see my tracks coming down the mountain, and beside them, or sometimes overlapping them, was another set wider, deeper, but with no clear shape I could identify. I practically ran across the ice to the lavo, where my father had a fire going. He took one look at my face and stood up immediately. What happened, he asked, but his tone was strange, almost like he was expecting something. I collapsed by the fire, still trying to catch my breath. Between gasps, I told him everything: the silence, the footsteps, the chase. He listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When I finished, he just nodded and handed me a cup of hot coffee, adding a splash of whiskey without comment. "Did you see it?" he finally asked. "No," I said. "I never saw anything. Just heard it, felt it." He nodded again, staring into the fire. "Good. That's good. What was it?" I asked, still shaking. "You know something? What was following me?" My father was silent for a long time. Finally, he looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Part fear, part resignation. "Some things are better left ignored," he said quietly. My father told me the same thing when it happened to me, and his father before him. He poked at the fire, sending sparks up. "Don't worry about it. Don't ask about it. Some things are better left ignored." But no, Eric, his voice was firm. "We don't talk about it. That's how it's always been." We sat in silence after that. Dad refused to say anything more, and something in his tone told me not to push it. We spent the night in the lavabo, and I barely slept, jumping at every sound outside the thin walls. The next morning, we packed up and returned to the main cabin. Dad insisted we continue the hunting trip as planned, but he wouldn't let me go alone after that. We stayed together, hunting in the valleys, never going back up the mountain. The rest of the trip passed without incident, but something had changed. I felt watched constantly, even inside the cabin at night. I sometimes heard what sounded like footsteps circling outside, but my father would just turn up the radio he brought or talk louder, deliberately drowning out the sounds. When we finally left, I felt relief wash over me as our boat pulled away from shore. Looking back at the mountains, I could have sworn I saw something moving at the tree line, a dark shape watching us leave. I never went back to that cabin. My father continued his annual hunting trips until he died 5 years ago. Among his papers, I found his journal with entries going back decades. Most were mundane notes about hunting conditions, weather, that sort of thing. But there was one entry, dated exactly 40 years before my experience, describing almost the exact same encounter when he was 16. The entry ended with his father's words to him: "Don't worry about it. Don't ask about it. Some things are better left ignored." I still don't know what followed me that day. Whatever regional folklore might suggest, a huldra, a miling, or something else. I only know it was real. It was terrifying. And apparently, it's been stalking my family for generations. Sometimes, even now, when I'm alone in the woods or walking home on a quiet night, I'll hear footsteps behind me, matching mine step for step, with just that slight delay. I never look back anymore. Some things are better left ignored. I still can't believe what happened 6 months ago. I've never told anyone outside my immediate family and the police about this, but I need to get it off my chest. Sorry if this comes out messy. I'm still trying to process everything. I'm Mason, 19, and last summer I took a job on a massive cattle property in rural New South Wales, Australia, through this backpacker work program. The property was insanely huge, like bigger than some small countries, it felt like. It was about 9 hours from Sydney, and the closest town was 40 minutes away down a dirt road. When I say remote, I mean remote. No cell service, spotty internet at the main house only, and the nearest neighbor was over an hour away. The owner, Jeremy, was this weathered Aussie guy in his 50s who'd inherited the place from his dad. He was decent enough, tough but fair. There were 5 of us working there, me, 2 German backpackers, Lucas and Stefan, a Swedish girl named Elsa, and this older guy, Mike, who'd been working there for years. The work was brutal. We'd start before sunrise, fixing fences, moving cattle, repairing equipment, whatever needed doing. The heat was the worst part. Being summer in the outback, it regularly hit 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and there was no escape from it. The flies were relentless too, constantly in your face-sized mouth. You just learned to live with them. One day in January, I remember it clearly because it was particularly awful. The temperature hit 38 degrees Celsius, 100 degrees Fahrenheit by 10 o'clock in the morning. We'd been out since 5 a.m. replacing fence posts along the eastern boundary. Around noon, Jeremy drove out in his dusty Land Cruiser, and told us we could have the rest of the day off because of the heat. The others were stoked. They headed back to crash in the bunkhouse where there was at least a fan. I was about to join them when Jeremy mentioned he was heading to this water hole on the northern part of the property to check on some pumping equipment. He asked if I wanted to come along for the ride, and honestly, I was bored, so I thought, why not? I figured a water hole sounded better than a stuffy bunkhouse anyway. The property was so big it took us nearly 25 minutes just to drive to this part of it, bumping along these barely there tracks through scrubland. Nothing but red dirt, scattered trees, and the occasional kangaroo watching us pass. We were chatting about nothing important, rugby, whether it would rain anytime soon, it wouldn't, that kind of stuff. We were about 5 minutes from the water hole when Jeremy suddenly slowed down. At first, I thought he'd spotted a snake or something on the track, but then I saw what he was looking at, and it made no sense. There, sitting in the middle of absolutely nowhere, was a blue shipping container. Not some rusted-out abandoned thing. This looked relatively new. It was just there. No road leading to it, no other structures around, nothing. Just this container sitting in the dirt, maybe 200 meters, about 650 feet, off the track we were on. What the hell is that doing there? Jeremy said more to himself than to me. He turned the truck toward it. As we got closer, I noticed a few things that were odd. There was a small diesel generator next to it, humming away, and an air conditioning unit was attached to one side, the kind you'd see on a small office building. Then I spotted a security camera mounted on one corner of the container and another one on the opposite side. Jeremy parked about 20 meters, about 65 feet away. We just sat there for a minute, staring at it. "This is my land," he said finally, "and I didn't put that here." We got out of the truck. The heat hit me like a wall after the air-conditioned cap. The container looked even more out of place up close. The blue paint was bright against the red dirt. It had one of those heavy-duty padlocks on the door, not your average master lock, but a serious piece of hardware. "Someone's trespassing," Jeremy said, his face getting red. He was getting angry now. "This is private property, miles from anywhere. Who the hell would put this here?" We walked around it. The generator was relatively new, with plenty of fuel. The air conditioning was running. You could hear it cycling. There was a small satellite dish mounted on top, pointed skyward. This wasn't some abandoned storage. This was active, operational, something. Jeremy tried the padlock, but it was solid. He went back to his truck and returned with a bolt cutter. I probably should have questioned the legality of what we were about to do, but honestly, this was his land, and some stranger had put a container on it. He had every right to know what was going on. The lock broke with a sharp snap. Jeremy pulled it off and swung the container door open. Cold air rushed out. The inside was air-conditioned to what felt like 18 degrees Celsius, 64 degrees Fahrenheit. It was like walking into a refrigerator after being in an oven. And what we saw inside, it was like something from a sci-fi movie. The container had been converted into some kind of high-tech setup. One entire wall was filled with servers and computer equipment, all humming away, lights blinking. There was a desk with 3 large monitors, all showing different things. One had what looked like code scrolling, another showed what seemed to be a map with dots moving across it, and the third was just a desktop. "What the fuck?" Jeremy whispered. The place was immaculate. The floor was clean, there was proper lighting installed in the ceiling, and a small fridge in one corner next to a camping chair. Whoever was using this place was coming here regularly. Jeremy moved toward the computers, probably trying to make sense of what he was seeing. I noticed some plastic storage boxes stacked at the back of the container and went to check them out. There were 3 large boxes with lids, neatly stacked. I figured they might give us some clue about who this belonged to. I opened the first box. It contained what looked like backup drives, dozens of them, all labeled with dates and codes, nothing that made sense to me. The second box had various pieces of computer equipment, cables, keyboards, more hard drives, that kind of stuff. Then I opened the third box, and my stomach immediately twisted into a knot. It contained hundreds of printed photos and several USB drives labeled in a way that made my blood run cold. The photos on top were children. Not normal photos. Horrible photos. I shut the lid immediately, feeling like I was going to throw up. "Jeremy, I said, my voice barely working. "We need to get out of here and call the police. Now." He turned from the computers and must have seen my face because he didn't ask questions. I told him what I'd seen in the box, and his expression hardened. "Don't touch anything else," he said. We closed the container, putting the broken padlock back in place to make it look undisturbed at a glance, and got back in the truck. Jeremy drove faster than before, raising a cloud of dust behind us. Neither of us said much on the way back. What was there to say? We'd stumbled onto something evil. Back at the main house, Jeremy went straight to the landline, the only reliable phone on the property, and called the police. I heard him explaining the situation, giving coordinates, describing what we'd found. When he hung up, he told me they'd send officers from the nearest town, but it would take at least an hour for them to get there. We didn't tell the others. Jeremy just said there was a trespassing issue he was dealing with. We waited tense and silent until we heard vehicles approaching. 2 police cars pulled up with 4 officers total. Jeremy and I explained everything again, and they took notes. One officer, a sergeant, asked us to lead them back to the container. Jeremy and I got in his truck, and the police followed in their vehicles. The drive felt even longer this time, with this heavy knowledge weighing on us. When we arrived, something was immediately wrong. The container door was open. The police drew their weapons and approached cautiously. Jeremy and I were told to stay back. From where we were, I could see inside the container there was a fire burning. Someone had returned and set the place alight. The police rushed forward with fire extinguishers from their vehicles. The fire wasn't huge yet. It seemed focused on the area with the computers and the boxes I'd found. They managed to put it out pretty quickly, but the damage was done. When it was safe to look, most of the computer equipment had been removed. The servers were gone, the monitors smashed. The storage boxes were partly burned, but the police still found enough to confirm what I told them. They bagged everything as evidence, took photos, dusted for fingerprints. One officer found footprints leading away from the container toward the west. Fresh ones, probably only an hour old at most. Whoever had been here had fled on foot but must have had a vehicle stashed somewhere. The police called for backup, including a helicopter to search the area, but I knew it was probably too late. The police questioned us for hours. They wanted to know exactly what we'd seen before, what we'd touched, whether we recognized anything or anyone. We couldn't tell them much. The whole thing was surreal. In the days that followed, more police came. They set up a crime scene around the container. They searched the entire property, looking for, I don't know what, more containers, the people responsible. They were tight-lipped about what they found or didn't find. I contacted the investigating officer weekly for updates. After a month, they told me the case was ongoing, but with no substantial leads. The computers had been wiped and partially destroyed. The satellite connection had been to an anonymous server. The generator and air conditioning unit had been purchased with cash from different hardware stores across 3 states. Whoever had set this up knew how to cover their tracks. 3 months later, I quit the job and moved back to the city. I couldn't stand being out there anymore, knowing what had happened. Every time I drove past that part of the property, I felt sick. The container is still there as far as I know. The police finished with it but left it in place. Jeremy wanted to have it removed, but apparently the police advised against it, something about the ongoing investigation. So it just sits there, empty now, a blue box in the middle of nowhere. I keep thinking about what we interrupted that day. Was someone monitoring those cameras when we approached? Did they see us break in? Were they watching from somewhere nearby? How quickly did they get there after we left? And most disturbing, what are they using that setup for beyond the obvious horrible content we found? The server setup was massive, way more than you'd need just to store files. What else were they doing out there in the middle of nowhere? I check the news sometimes, looking for any mention of arrests related to child exploitation in rural New South Wales. Nothing so far that seems connected. It's like we stumbled upon this horrible thing, and then it just vanished, except for that container sitting out there like a monument to something evil. I still have nightmares about it. Not about what I saw in the box, though that was horrific enough. I dream about driving alone on that property and seeing not one container, but dozens of them, stretching out across the landscape. And in the dream, all the doors swing open at once, but I always wake up before I can see what's inside them. The police told me I did the right thing, that I might have helped disrupt something terrible. But it doesn't feel that way. It feels like we scraped the surface of something much bigger, and then whoever was behind it just picked up and moved somewhere else, deeper into the shadows, where no one will accidentally stumble across them. I don't know why I'm sharing this now. Maybe just to warn people that these things exist in places you'd never expect. The middle of nowhere isn't always empty. Sometimes the isolation is exactly the point. The scariest part, whoever set up that container is still out there, and they know exactly what Jeremy and I look like. This happened about 3 years ago, but I still think about it almost every day. I've never posted about it online before because, honestly, I wasn't ready to relive it. I'm still not sure I am, but I need to get this off my chest. My name is Steve. My buddy Greg and I have been friends since high school. Both of us grew up in a small town near Jackson, Michigan. We've always been into exploring abandoned places, urban legends, that kind of stuff. Nothing serious, just weekend adventures whenever we got bored. That summer, we'd heard rumors about this place called Purgatory Woods, about 40 minutes from where we lived. Local legend said Al Capone, a famous American gangster from the 1920s and 30s, used to have a hideout somewhere in those woods during Prohibition when alcohol was illegal in the U.S. It sounded like bullshit, but we were bored and Greg had just gotten a new camera he wanted to try out. We figured we'd check it out, maybe find some cool abandoned structures to photograph, have a few beers, then head home, normal stuff. We parked Greg's truck at this little dirt lot near the trailhead around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The weather was perfect, not too hot, just a bit overcast. We packed light, just water, some snacks, Greg's camera, and a couple of flashlights in case we found anything worth exploring inside. The forest was denser than I expected. The trail was obvious at first, but about 2 miles in, it started to fade. We kept going, following what looked like it might have once been a path. I remember joking with Greg that we should have brought breadcrumbs to find our way back. We'd been walking for maybe an hour and a half when the trees suddenly opened up into this small clearing, and there it was, this house. Just sitting there in the middle of nowhere. A goddamn house. Not a cabin or a shack like you might expect to find in the woods. A full-on 2-story house with a front porch and everything. It was painted this faded blue color, peeling badly. The roof was missing a bunch of shingles, and the porch steps were half-rotted. It looked like it had been there for decades, completely forgotten. "Dude, what the hell is a house doing out here?" Greg said, already pulling out his camera. I remember feeling this immediate sense of wrongness, like, who builds a house this deep in the woods? There was no road, no driveway, nothing. Just forest all around it. "Maybe this is Capone's place," Greg laughed, snapping photos. "I don't think gangsters lived in blue farmhouses, man," I replied, but I was curious too. I've explored a lot of abandoned buildings, but something about this one felt different. It felt, I don't know how else to put it, it felt like it was watching us. We approached slowly. The front yard was overgrown with weeds up to our knees. There was an old metal swing set off to the side, rusted through, creaking slightly in the breeze. No other structures around, no garage, no shed, nothing. Just this blue house sitting alone in a clearing. The front door was partially open, hanging crooked on its hinges. Greg wanted to go in right away, but I hesitated. I'm not usually the cautious type, but something felt off. I can't explain it, just this feeling in my gut telling me to leave. But Greg was already on the porch, testing the boards with his foot to make sure they wouldn't collapse. "Come on, don't be a wimp," he called back to me. So I followed him. The porch creaked under our weight but held. The front door opened with this horrible screeching noise that echoed through the empty house. The smell hit us first, must and mildew, but something else too, something vaguely chemical, like old developing fluid. It made sense when we saw what was covering the floor, photographs. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them, scattered across the entire floor of what must have been the living room. They were layered like fallen leaves, some yellowed with age, others seemingly more recent, Polaroids, regular prints, even some old black and whites. "Holy shit," Greg whispered, crouching down to look at them. I did the same, picking one up carefully. It was a picture of a man standing in front of a tree. Just a normal-looking guy, maybe in his 40s, staring directly at the camera with no expression. I picked up another one, a woman sitting at a kitchen table, again staring blankly at the camera. Then another, a teenage boy on a bicycle. And another, an elderly couple on a porch swing. They all had the same quality, just regular people staring straight ahead. No smiles, no expressions, just looking. None of the photos seemed connected, different time periods, different people, different settings, but all with that same blank stare. "Who took all these?" Greg asked, thumbing through a stack he'd gathered. "And why are they all here?" I didn't have an answer. We stepped carefully through the sea of photographs toward what looked like a dining room. More pictures there, but fewer, mostly concentrated along the walls. The kitchen beyond was surprisingly intact. Old appliances from maybe the 70s, cabinets hanging open, a table with 3 chairs, one tipped over. "Let's check upstairs," Greg suggested, already heading toward the staircase in the hall. That's when I heard it, a soft tapping sound coming from somewhere down the hallway past the stairs. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. "You hear that?" I asked Greg. He nodded, still moving toward the stairs. Probably just water dripping or something. But it wasn't water. The rhythm was too deliberate, too consistent. Tap, tap, tap. "Maybe we should go," I said, that feeling of wrongness growing stronger. "We've seen enough. Just want to check out upstairs first," Greg insisted, putting his foot on the first stair. There was a loud crack, and Greg yelled out in pain. His foot had gone straight through the rotten wood, and when he pulled it back up, there was a rusty nail stuck through the sole of his boot into his foot. "Ouch," he shouted, sitting down hard on the steps. "Man, Steve, it's in deep." I moved to help him, but the tapping had stopped. The house was completely silent now. I looked down the hallway beyond the stairs, and that's when I saw him. At the end of the corridor stood a man. A massive man. He must have been 6 feet 5 inches at least, but it wasn't just his height. He was wide, with this strange, disproportionate build. His arms seemed too long for his body, hanging down at his sides. He had this bowl haircut, dark haircut in a perfect circle around his head. He was wearing clothes that didn't fit right, a gray t-shirt that stretched tight around his stomach and jeans that were too short, showing pale white ankles above dirty work boots. But it was his face that made my blood run cold. He was smiling, this wide, unnatural grin that showed too many teeth. His eyes were fixed on us, unblinking. "Greg," I said quietly, still staring at the man. "Greg, we need to go now." Greg looked up from his injured foot, following my gaze down the hall. He went completely still. "Who the heck is that?" he whispered. The man took a step forward, still grinning. Then another. His movements were odd, jerky, like he wasn't used to walking. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaking. "We're just looking around. We're going to leave now." Another step, that grin never faltering. I reached down to help Greg up, keeping my eyes on the man. "Come on, we need to go." Greg tried to stand but cried out when he put weight on his injured foot. The man's head tilted at the sound, like a curious dog, and suddenly he was moving faster. Not running exactly, but taking long, rapid strides toward us. Everything happened so fast after that. The man lunged at Greg, grabbing him by the shoulders and slamming him back onto the floor. Greg screamed, trying to push him off, but the guy was incredibly strong. I stood there frozen for a second, watching this stranger pin my friend to the ground among all those photographs, that terrible grin still on his face. Greg was yelling, struggling, and I snapped out of it. I looked around frantically for something, anything to use as a weapon. There's a piece of broken floorboard nearby, about 2 feet long, with a nail sticking out of one end. I grabbed it and swung as hard as I could at the man's head. The nail caught him across the cheek, tearing a long gash from his ear to his mouth. But he didn't scream. He didn't even flinch. He just slowly turned that grinning face toward me, blood now pouring down his cheek and onto his gray shirt. I've never been so terrified in my life. It was like hitting something that wasn't human. But the distraction worked. Greg managed to wrench himself free, scrambling backward toward the door, leaving bloody footprints on the photographs beneath him. I backed up too, still holding the board in front of me. The man stood up slowly, blood dripping from his face onto the floor. His expression hadn't changed at all, still that same unnatural grin. He took a step toward me, and I swung the board again, keeping him at bay. "Run!" I shouted to Greg, who had made it to the front door. I started backing toward the exit, still facing the man, still holding my makeshift weapon. When I reached the door, I turned and sprinted after Greg, who was limping as fast as he could across the overgrown yard. I caught up to him at the edge of the clearing, grabbing his arm to help support him as we plunged back into the woods. We didn't follow any path. We just ran, crashing through undergrowth, branches whipping our faces, tripping over roots. Greg was in agony, but adrenaline kept him moving. I kept looking back, expecting to see that grinning face behind us, but there was nothing but trees. After maybe 15 minutes of running, we stopped to catch our breath. Greg collapsed against a tree, his face pale with pain. I could see blood soaking through his boot. "Do you think he's following us?" Greg gasped. I listened. The forest was quiet except for our breathing and the occasional bird call. "I don't know. We need to keep moving, find our way back to the truck." But we were completely turned around. In our panic, we'd run in a random direction, and now nothing looked familiar. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. We wandered for what felt like hours, Greg leaning on me more and more heavily as his strength faded. His foot was badly infected from the rusty nail, and he was developing a fever. I was starting to think we might have to spend the night in the woods when we finally stumbled onto a trail. Not the one we'd come in on, but a trail nonetheless. We followed it and eventually came out at a different parking area than where we'd left Greg's truck. There was an older couple getting ready to hike, and they immediately saw we were in trouble. They drove us to the nearest hospital, where Greg had to get a tetanus shot and antibiotics for his foot. I gave a statement to the local police about the man in the house. They took it seriously enough, but when they went to investigate the next day, they couldn't find the blue house. They found the clearing where we said it was, but there was nothing there. No house, no foundation, not even any sign that a structure had ever existed in that spot. They concluded that we must have been confused about the location, disoriented for being lost in the woods. Maybe we'd even hallucinated the worst parts due to panic and, in Greg's case, the beginning of a serious infection. But I know what I saw. That house was there. Those photographs were real. And that man, that inhuman grinning man, he was definitely real. I've researched everything I can about Purgatory Wood since then. I found some old references to a blue house in newspaper archives from the 1950s. Apparently, there was a photographer who lived out there, a recluse who was known for taking portraits of locals. The articles were vague, but there were rumors about people going missing after having their pictures taken. The house supposedly burned down in 1962 with the photographer inside it. But if that's true, what did we see? And who was the man with the grin? Greg won't talk about it anymore. He moved to Chicago last year, said he needed to get away from the area completely. I don't blame him. I've thought about moving too, but something keeps me here. Maybe I need to know what happened, what that place really was. I haven't gone back to Purgatory Woods, and I never will. But sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I still see those photographs covering the floor, all those empty faces staring up. And sometimes I swear I can hear that tap, tap, tap coming from somewhere in my apartment, like someone's trying to get my attention. I still have nightmares about that grin, that terrible, unnatural grin that didn't change even when I drove a nail through his face. Sometimes I wonder if he's still there in that house that doesn't exist, waiting for someone else to wander into that clearing. Or worse, I wonder if he's looking for us. I've never shared this story before, but it's been haunting me for 10 years now. I still get chills thinking about it, still wake up sometimes with my heart pounding. Maybe writing it down will help me process what happened, I don't know. Back in 2014, I was a university student in a small coastal village in France. I won't name the exact place. It's not that big, and I don't want anyone recognizing the specific details. It was one of those postcard-perfect places tourists dream about. Old stone buildings, narrow streets winding down to a little harbor, fishing boats bobbing in the water. The kind of place where nothing bad is supposed to happen. I chose to study there because of the beautiful location and the highly rated linguistics program. The town was perfect for students, small enough that you could get around easily by bike, but with enough cafes and little shops to make it interesting. Everyone cycled there. The buses only ran a few times a day, and most students couldn't afford cars. I lived about 8 kilometers, about 5 miles from campus in a tiny apartment I rented from an elderly couple, and I biked to classes every day. When I first arrived, I felt like I'd lucked out completely. The town was gorgeous, my classes were interesting, and within a few months, I'd met Antoine. He was studying engineering at the Technical Institute near my university. He was tall, with dark curly hair, and the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We met at a cafe where I was struggling with some translation homework, and he offered to help since his mother was a language teacher. One thing led to another, and by Christmas we were inseparable. In December, Antoine invited me to his engineering school's Christmas party. It was the first time I'd met all his friends at once, and I remember feeling a bit overwhelmed. There were about 30 people there, mostly guys from his program. Everyone was drinking and having a good time. I specifically remember Mark, one of Antoine's classmates, because he kept trying to talk to me about linguistics, saying he found it fascinating. He was a bit awkward but sweet, the kind of guy who gets really passionate about technical subjects and doesn't always pick up on social cues. The party was fun, nothing unusual happened, and I didn't think much more about it afterward. Antoine and I spent the Christmas break together, then returned to our studies in January. About a month after that party, Mark was found dead in the harbor. I still remember exactly where I was when I heard. I was sitting in the university library working on a paper when my phone buzzed with a text from Antoine. Mark is dead. They found him in the water this morning. At first, I thought it was some kind of sick joke. Mark wasn't the type to get drunk and fall into the harbor. He barely drank at all. He was careful, methodical, the kind of person who planned everything. The police investigation didn't turn up much. There were no witnesses, no clear signs of violence on his body, though it had been in the water for hours. They eventually ruled it an accident or possible suicide. But something about it never sat right with me or with any of Antoine's friends. Life went on as it always does. We talked about Mark less and less as the weeks passed, though I could tell Antoine was shaken by it. We all were. But you adjust, You tell yourself it was a tragic accident, and you move forward because what else can you do? Then in late April, something happened that brought all those uneasy feelings rushing back. Thomas, another friend from Antoine's program, was attacked while cycling home from a study session. Thomas wasn't just any guy, he was huge, like former rugby player huge, almost 2 meters tall, over 6 feet 6 inches, and built like a brick wall. The kind of guy nobody would want to mess with. He was found at 3 o'clock in the morning, his head smashed against a concrete step at the side of the road, his jaw completely shattered. His bike was mangled, like someone had deliberately twisted the frame. When he regained consciousness in the hospital 2 days later, he couldn't remember anything about the attack, just cycling home and then waking up in a hospital bed unable to speak because his jaw was wired shut. The police investigated, but again, no witnesses, no suspects. They suggested maybe he'd been hit by a drunk driver who fled the scene, but that didn't explain why nothing was stolen. His wallet, phone, and laptop were all still in his backpack. After Thomas's attack, a kind of quiet fear settled over our friend group. People started cycling in pairs, heading home before dark when possible. But student life doesn't always allow for that. Sometimes you have late classes, study sessions, or parties that keep you out after dark. I kept cycling my route every day. What choice did I have? I couldn't afford taxis, and as I mentioned, the buses were practically non-existent, especially at night. I started carrying pepper spray in my pocket, though I'm not even sure if it was legal. I just needed something to make me feel safer. Summer came, and things calmed down a bit. No more attacks, no more mysterious deaths. Maybe it had been a random thing after all. When the new school year started in September of 2015, the tension had largely faded. New students arrived who hadn't heard about Mark or Thomas, and life went back to normal. Antoine and I had been together for almost a year by then. Things weren't perfect. We bickered sometimes about stupid things, and he could be moody and distant. But I was still completely in love with him. Looking back now, there were warning signs I ignored because I didn't want to see them. Times when he put himself first without considering my feelings. But isn't that true of most relationships at that age? It happened on a Friday night in October. One of our friends was having a birthday party at his apartment near the harbor. It was a good night, food, drinks, music, the usual student party stuff. Antoine seemed in a great mood, laughing and joking with everyone. We stayed until about 1 o'clock in the morning and then decided to head home. The night was clear but chilly, that crisp autumn air that makes your cheeks flush. We put on our jackets, said our goodbyes, and got on our bikes. Antoine's apartment was in the same direction as mine for the first part of the journey, so we always cycled part of the way together. I remember noticing right away that Antoine was pedaling faster than usual. Normally we'd ride side by side, talking about the party or whatever, but that night he kept pulling ahead. I called out to him a couple of times, asking him to slow down, but he'd only wait for a moment before speeding up again. "What's your hurry?" I shouted after the third or fourth time this happened. "I'm cold," he called back. "Just trying to warm up." As we got further from the center of town, the streetlights became fewer and further between. The road narrowed, with trees on one side and an old stone wall on the other. During the day, it was a pretty route. At night, it was different, shadows everywhere, the trees making strange patterns in the moonlight. Antoine was now about 20 meters, about 65 feet, ahead of me, just a silhouette in the darkness. I was getting annoyed at being left behind and was about to shout to him again when I heard the sound of footsteps running on the pavement behind me. Before I could turn to look, something slammed into my bike from the side. I felt the handlebars twist violently as my bike tipped, and I just managed to get one foot on the ground to stop myself from falling completely. As I struggled to regain my balance, I saw him, a figure dressed all in black, but pulled up so I couldn't see his face. He kicked my bike again, harder this time, aiming for the front wheel. I fought to keep hold of the handlebars, my heart suddenly pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Antoine," I screamed, looking desperately ahead to where I'd last seen my boyfriend. I could just make out Antoine's figure in the distance. He'd stop pedaling and turn around. Our eyes met, I'm certain of it. Even across that distance, I saw him clearly in the moonlight, looking back at me. And then, I still can't believe this part even now, he turned away. He just turned his bike around and pedaled away faster than before, leaving me there. The shock of his betrayal froze me for a crucial second. In that moment, my attacker kicked at my bike a third time, and this time I went down, hitting the pavement hard with my hip and elbow. The pain was instant and sharp, but the adrenaline was already flooding my system. The man grabbed for my backpack, which contained my laptop and wallet. Something in me just snapped. Maybe it was seeing Antoine abandon me. Maybe he was thinking about Mark and Thomas. But suddenly, I was filled with a rage unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I held onto my backpack with one hand and used the other to grab my bike, which was lying next to me. I swung it upward, hitting him in the legs. He stumbled backward, cursing in French with an accent I didn't recognize. I scrambled to my feet, still clutching my backpack. My bike was between us now, a metal barrier. He lunged forward, trying to grab me over the bike. I saw something glint in his hand, glass, I think maybe a bottle. Without thinking, I let go of my backpack and grabbed his wrist with both hands, twisting as hard as I could. He howled in pain, dropping whatever he was holding. It shattered on the pavement. I remember the sound so clearly, that distinctive crack of breaking glass, like a gunshot in the quiet night. We struggled for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. His hood fell back, and I caught a glimpse of his face in the dim light, an ordinary face, not monstrous or scarred or any of the things you might imagine. Just a man, maybe his 30s, with stubble and hollow cheeks. I managed to pry a large shard of glass from the ground and, acting purely on instinct, slashed it toward his face. I felt it connect, heard him scream. There was a warm wetness on my hand that I knew must be blood. He staggered backward, hands over his face. I didn't wait to see more. I grabbed my bike, which was miraculously still in working condition, jumped on it, and pedaled away as fast as I could, not looking back once. I cycled straight to the police station, still bleeding from my elbow, and with what turned out to be a nasty bruise forming on my hip. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the handlebars. The police took my statement, but I could tell they were skeptical. A lone attacker in the night? A boyfriend who mysteriously abandoned me? It sounded far-fetched even to my own ears. They asked if I'd been drinking. I had, but wasn't drunk. If I'd argued with Antoine, we hadn't. If I could identify my attacker, I couldn't. Not really. They drove me to the scene, but of course there was no one there. Just some broken glass on the pavement that could have been from anything. They did find traces of blood that matched my story about cutting the attacker, but without anything to compare it to, that evidence was useless. I tried calling Antoine repeatedly that night, but he didn't answer. When he finally responded the next day, his explanation made me sick. He claimed he thought I had just fallen off my bike by accident, said he panicked and didn't know what to do. When I pressed him about seeing the attacker, he denied it, said it was too dark to see clearly, that he thought I was alone. I knew he was lying. I'd seen his face in that moment when he looked back, seen the calculation, the decision to save himself. We broke up that day. I moved to a different apartment closer to campus within the week and started taking self-defense classes. I reported what happened to the university, but without any proof beyond my word, there wasn't much they could do. The attack on me was never officially connected to what happened to Thomas or to Mark's death. Maybe they weren't connected. Maybe it was all just horrible coincidence. But here's the thing that still haunts me. In the weeks after my attack, I heard rumors that 2 other students had been attacked in similar circumstances, both while cycling alone at night. Neither as lucky as me. One had been hospitalized with severe injuries, the other robbed of everything she had. And then, as suddenly as they'd begun, the attack stopped. No explanation, no suspects caught. It's been 10 years now. I finished my degree, moved to a different city, built a new life. I haven't spoken to Antoine since we broke up, though I looked him up online once and saw he's working as an engineer in Germany now. Sometimes I wonder if my attacker was caught for some other crime, or if he moved on to another town with isolated roads and students on bicycles. Sometimes I wonder if he still has a scar on his face from that night. But mostly, I think about Antoine's face in that moment when he turned away. Sometimes in my nightmares, I see it clearly. Not fear, not panic, but something colder, something that knew exactly what was happening and what he was doing. That's what scares me most, even now. Not the man who attacked me, but the person I trusted who left me to face him alone. I'm still trying to process what happened to my family last month. We're not the type to believe in supernatural stuff or conspiracy theories, but sometimes you experience something so unnerving that it shakes your entire sense of reality. I need to write this down. Maybe someone out there has had a similar experience or can explain what we stumbled into. My name is Carlos Martinez. Every winter, my family takes a road trip from my parents' place in Albuquerque, New Mexico, back to our home in Phoenix, Arizona, after the holidays. My wife Elena, our 17-year-old son Miguel, and our 15-year-old daughter Sophia were all with me. We usually take I-40, but this year I suggested we take a more scenic route through the countryside. Elena had been stressed with work, and I thought seeing some of New Mexico's natural beauty might help her relax. That decision still haunts me. We left Albuquerque around noon. The first few hours were actually beautiful. Red rock formations, sprawling pine forests, huge open skies. We stopped for snacks at a gas station outside Grants, and then continued southwest. I had marked a few small towns on our route where we could potentially stop for dinner before finishing the drive. It was around 4 o'clock in the afternoon when we turned onto Route 53. The kids were in the back seat, glued to their phones, occasionally looking up when we passed something interesting. Elena was navigating, checking our route on a paper map because cell service had gotten spotty. My GPS kept cutting in and out, but I wasn't worried. I knew the general direction we needed to go. According to this, we should pass through a place called Fence Lake soon, Elena said, tracing her finger along the map. Looks tiny, but maybe we can find somewhere to grab dinner. The road narrowed as we continued. Trees pressed closer on both sides, and the winter sky was already darkening. I remember feeling this odd sense of, pressure, like when a storm is coming and the barometric pressure drops. My ears even popped a couple of times. "Dad, I don't have any signal at all," Miguel complained from the back seat. "I thought we'd have at least some coverage by now." "We're in the mountains, mijo," I answered. "It'll come back when we get closer to civilization." But something felt off about that explanation, even as I said it. We weren't that deep into the wilderness. There should have been at least some spotty service. We rounded a bend in the road, and suddenly the trees opened up. A wooden sign appeared, Fence Lake Pop 182. The paint was peeling, and it looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. Beyond it stood several buildings, what appeared to be a main street with some businesses and scattered houses behind them. Finally, Sophia sighed. "I need a bathroom and real food." I pulled onto the main street, which wasn't much more than a wide dirt road with a few worn buildings lining it. There was a general store, what looked like a fire station, a small diner, and some other nondescript buildings. But as I slowed the car, the first thing that struck me was how absolutely silent the place was. No, that's not quite right. It wasn't just silent. It felt muted, like someone had thrown a heavy blanket over everything. The air seemed thick. "Where is everyone?" Elena murmured, peering out the window. That's when I realized what was bothering me. There wasn't a single person visible anywhere. No cars moving on the street, no pedestrians, not even anyone looking out windows. The buildings all appeared intact, not abandoned exactly, but there was no sign of life. No smoke from chimneys despite the cold. No lights glowing inside windows against the approaching dusk. Nothing. "Maybe it's a siesta town," I joked weakly, but my voice sounded strained even to my own ears. We rolled slowly down the main street. I could see dust motes floating in the beams of our headlights. The storefronts we passed had signs in the windows, but they looked faded, and I couldn't make out what any of them said. The diner's neon open sign was dark. "Dad, check out that car." Miguel pointed to an old Ford pickup parked in front of the general store. Its paint was dull with dust, but it didn't look ancient or abandoned, just unused for a while. I pulled up beside the fire station, which had its bay doors closed. A small light was visible in what must have been an office window. Finally, a light. Elena sounded relieved. "Someone must be there. I'll go see if I can get directions or find out if there's somewhere to eat," Miguel offered, already unbuckling his seatbelt. Before I could object, he was out of the car. "Miguel, wait." I called after him, but he was already jogging up to the side door of the fire station. The rest of us sat in silence watching him. The air inside the car felt heavy, and I suddenly realized I'd been holding my breath. I exhaled slowly, fogging up the windshield slightly. The temperature seemed to be dropping rapidly with the sun. Sophia was peering out her window at the houses behind the main street. "Dad, look at those homes. No lights, no Christmas decorations, nothing. It's like 6 p.m. on a weekday in winter. Where is everyone?" She was right. Every house was dark. Not a single porch light, not one warm glow from a living room TV or kitchen. Just dark shapes against the darkening sky. Maybe there was an evacuation, Elena suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. A gas leak or something, but there were no emergency vehicles, no roadblocks, no signs warning travelers to stay away. Just emptiness. Miguel was gone for about 5 minutes when he finally emerged from the fire station. His face had gone pale. He jogged back to the car and practically dove into the back seat. "We need to go now," he said, his voice tight. "What happened?" "What did you see?" I asked, turning to look at him properly. Miguel was visibly shaken. Nobody was there. But it's like they just got up and left midday. There's paperwork on desks, coffee mugs still half full, but with mold growing in them. Everything's covered in dust. And there's a calendar on the wall. He swallowed. It's from 2010, over 13 years ago. A chill ran up my spine. "Did you see anyone at all?" I asked. No, but Miguel hesitated. I felt like someone was watching me the entire time. And when I called out, I swear I heard footsteps upstairs, but nobody answered when I yelled, "Hello." Elena reached over and gripped my arm. "Carlos, let's go." "This doesn't feel right." I nodded and put the car in drive, suddenly eager to be anywhere but Fence Lake. As we continued down the main street, planning to exit on the other side of town, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Houses that had seemed empty moments before now showed faint signs of occupancy. A curtain moving slightly, though there was no breeze, a shadow passing behind a frosted bathroom window. Nothing overt, nothing I could point to definitively, but the distinct feeling that we were being observed from every direction. "Is anyone else seeing this?" I asked quietly. "Seeing what?" Sophia asked, but Elena nodded slowly. "The curtains, the windows," she whispered. "There are people in those houses, watching us." The road curved ahead, and I accelerated slightly, desperate to reach the town limits. The light was fading fast now, the sunset bleeding out behind the mountains. My headlights cut twin paths through the growing darkness. As we approached what appeared to be the edge of town, I spotted a man standing beside the road. He was motionless, just staring at our car as we approached. His stillness was unnatural. No shifting from foot to foot, no adjustment for the cold, just watching. "Dad." Sophia's voice was high with fear. "I see him," I said, my hands tight on the wheel. I slowed slightly as we approached, unsure if he needed help or was trying to flag us down. The man made no gesture, no attempt to wave us over. He simply stood, his face expressionless, eyes fixed on our car. As we drew level with him, I could see his clothes were oddly outdated, not vintage or deliberately retro, just old, worn in a way that suggested they'd been in constant use for decades. He turned his head to follow our car as we passed, his movements mechanical. In the rearview mirror, I could see him still watching as we drove away, not moving from his spot, not calling after us, just observing. "Did you see his eyes?" Miguel whispered from the back seat. I hadn't, not clearly, but something about the man's gaze had been deeply unsettling, even in that brief encounter. We passed the town limit sign, and I pressed the accelerator harder, wanting to put as much distance between us and Fence Lake as possible. For about a mile, nobody spoke. The only sound was the hum of the engine and our breathing. Then Sophia broke the silence. "This will sound weird, but did that town feel like it was holding its breath to anyone else?" That was exactly it. The perfect description of the unnatural stillness we'd encountered. "Maybe it's one of those religious communities," Elena suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. "Some kind of group that doesn't believe in electricity or modern conveniences, but that wouldn't explain the abandoned fire station with its modern equipment, or the pickup truck that wasn't antique, just neglected." We drove in silence for another 20 minutes before cell service suddenly returned. All our phones chimed almost simultaneously with incoming texts and notifications. The sound was so normal, so everyday, that it broke some of the tension. We found a proper restaurant in a normal, occupied town about an hour later and stopped for dinner, all of us deliberately not talking about Fence Lake over our meal. It wasn't until we got home to Phoenix the next day that I mentioned the town to my buddy Mark, who grew up in western New Mexico. I expected him to be confused, maybe tell me I'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. His actual reaction was much worse. The blood drained from his face when I mentioned Fence Lake. "You actually stopped there?" "In the town itself?" he asked incredulously. I nodded, suddenly uneasy again. "Why? What's wrong with it?" Mark looked around like he was checking who might overhear, even though we were alone in my garage. "That place is on some kind of FBI watch list, man. People go missing around there. There are stories. The resident, they're not, right? They've been known to take travelers, hold them for ransom. Sometimes, you're lucky you left before someone decided you were going to." "That's ridiculous," I said, but my mouth had gone dry. The town seemed empty. We didn't see anyone except one man as we were leaving. Mark shook his head. "They were there, watching you, deciding." I've spent weeks researching Fence Lake since then. There's almost nothing online about it. A few coordinates, a mention that it's an unincorporated community in Cibola County, population unknown. No news stories, no local websites, nothing on social media. I tried calling the Cibola County Sheriff's Department, claiming I'd lost something while passing through, and wanted to know who to contact in Fence Lake to see if it had been found. The dispatcher's voice turned noticeably cooler when I mentioned the town. "Sir, if you have business in Fence Lake, you need to go through proper channels," she said stiffly. "What channels?" I asked. "I just need a phone number for someone there. I don't have that information." "Have a nice day." She hung up. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it was just a strange, nearly abandoned town that gave us the creeps, and Mark's warning was just local folklore. But I can't shake the feeling that we narrowly avoided something terrible. I keep thinking about those half-full coffee cups Miguel described, preserved like some macabre museum display. The calendar from 13 years ago. The motionless man by the roadside with his unnerving, steady gaze. And sometimes when I'm driving at dusk and pass through a quiet neighborhood, I catch myself scanning the windows for watching eyes, for curtains that move when there's no breeze. My family refuses to take back roads now. We stick to major highways, well-traveled routes where other cars are always visible. Was Fence Lake truly dangerous, or just eerily empty? Were people really watching us from those dark windows, or was it just our imagination running wild in an unsettling place? I don't know. But one thing's certain, none of us will ever take that scenic route again. Some roads are better left untraveled. Some towns better left unvisited. And if you're ever driving through western New Mexico and see a faded sign for Fence Lake, keep going. Don't stop. Don't even slow down. Because I can't shake the feeling that we only made it out because we sensed the wrongness quickly enough. Others might not be so fortunate.